They're the ones that are in charge of the flight termination system. And so we've heard about the range quite a bit throughout this entire process. What ended up happening tonight is the range lost communication with one of their radars. So they obviously have equipment to track the rockets as they leave the ground, go out to space. They have multiple ways of doing that. One of the, from what I can garner, is one of the more important radars that they use. They call just an asset, but is apparently critical enough that they called over to Charlie Blackwell Thompson, the flight director at Kennedy Space Center for this mission, and told her we are right now red. So if we were in the window currently, that would be a no-go.
Yeah.
But they were starting to work on a fix, and what they nailed it down to be was a switch, an Ethernet port switch that they needed to change out. So apparently that change has been made. The hardware change has been made. Now they have to go through configuration and checks to make sure that thing is working properly. And we'll kind of wait and see what the determination is on any delay possibilities from that. But as of right now, Brad, we are still at T-10 and holding.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys could bring up my computer real quickly, because I have a launch path here, and it actually shows the range. And as you were mentioned, Betsy, one of the radars is actually in Bermuda, because it actually tracks the basically from the ground up into orbit. Space Force is actually responsible for this, so it's a pretty big range. It goes well off the east coast of Florida all the way out to Bermuda, so it's a pretty big area. And that one radar, basically, they can't track the rocket once it goes downrange. So I remember when the GOES launch was down there, we had a similar issue with a recreational boater getting east of Florida there out in the range, which wasn't supposed to be there. The Coast Guard chased them off. So these small things, I mean, this is actually a minor thing compared to the leak. So it'll be interesting to see how much of a delay it is. We should mention that the window's 2 hours. So it goes from 1:04 a.m. to 3:04. So we probably know we're not going to launch at 1:04 unless there's like a minor miracle. But we don't know yet how far into that window we're going to go.
Well, and I think it's important to point out why these windows are what they are, right?
Yeah.
So you're thinking, why is this thing launching at 1:04 a.m. and why is it a 2-hour window? Well, interestingly enough, you can only imagine the number of calculations that have to go into play to put this rocket into perfect orbit, to get it into the perfect place, to hit an engine at the perfect time, to start it on its way to the moon and get in the perfect orbit around the moon and avoid all the debris that could be flying around. Yeah. They call these cutouts in the actual launch window. There are little time frames that are cut out that they can't launch during a certain time frame in case they hit something like a satellite.
Yeah.
Or some kind of debris. But beyond that, they are planning on when this rocket, or when the space capsule, when the Orion space capsule will be splashing down. Yeah. They are timing all the way to the moment of splashdown. That's how precise this is. They have to have Orion coming back during daylight for splashdown. Yeah. So everything is calculated based off of that. As of right now, the latest that we've heard is a 26-day mission. It'll be one orbit around the moon. And you know, it's pretty incredible when you start to think about all of the pieces, parts that have to come together, not only before they fire those engines, but once the engines fire and after they go from there, how precision guided everything is, and the timing that is just incredible.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking that back in August when we were looking at the different dates, and each date, the mission length changed because of that. And this is actually one of the shorter mission lengths with the launch tonight. It's 20 and a half days, like you said, 26 days. I think if they launch on Saturday, the mission length is like 10 days longer. So it's like really interesting how, like you said, the calculations of not getting that orbital path, also avoiding all of the debris, and then the splashdown. So it's amazing. It's a lot of math that goes into this. So I had that question today from a lot of viewers, you know, because they didn't want to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning to watch this. Like, why does it have to be at 1 o'clock? Well, it's not really up to us, you know. It's up to science and calculations here on when they're going to launch. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, if this gets pushed back later in that window or not, you know, what effect that's going to have on the overall mission. Because I'm looking at the countdown clock, I don't see like any changes so far. It doesn't look like they're adding time to it right now. I think what's going to happen, we probably won't know till like 1:04, Betsy, don't you think?
I would think that they're going to make a determination before the end of this hold. So this 30-minute hold at T10 would then come up at about 12:54. So I
Yeah.
would think we would hear maybe quarter till. We're probably going to hear before the end of this 30-minute window ends, and then they'll start that countdown clock up, or they'll continue to hold.
Yeah.
And then once they release that time, and we're getting an update now. So actually now is a good time to tell everybody, if you're wondering what the heck everything is going on and what we're even talking about, which there's a lot of people who may be just hearing about this for this first time. Artemis is incredible. Oh, we have the update. Let's listen in.
Off course and endanger the public. This is a mandatory test that needs to be completed. Again, the range finishing the work on the replacement of their Ethernet switch that was rendered their radar acquisition and sending of the flight termination signal to the SLS rocket repaired. And so now they need to run an open loop test to confirm that they have good signal going into the rocket in case they need to send a flight termination signal. For the upper stage of the rocket, let's talk about the whole rocket. Core stage and upper stage. We have the core stage in stable replenish, both hydrogen and oxygen. And in the upper stage, we're stable on the liquid oxygen side. We briefly paused fast fill on the upper stage, which is currently at 80% filled, in order to do a test of the vent valve on that liquid hydrogen tank. Fast fill has resumed, and currently we are in topping on the upper stage of liquid hydrogen. So that is just in. We are into topping on the upper stage of the liquid hydrogen tank, and we are awaiting the range testing their flight termination system with the launch team. This is Artemis Launch Control.
All right. So that was Daryl Nail, who is just the GOAT for all the media people.
Yeah.
He's the one who kind of walks us through everything. He's a commentator for the communications team there with NASA. And he has just such a knack for explaining everything and what's going on. So what we find out is that the communications problem that the range was having was not necessarily a radar, meaning a tracking radar, but it is the signal that sends the flight termination to the rocket if something were to go wrong.
Yeah, it's like the kill
kind
switch.
Of a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty important.
It's so fascinating to get this information, and it's just constantly coming in.
But it does sound like they're still going through the fueling process, making sure everything's topped off and everything. So it sounds like they at least think maybe it's going to be an easy fix.
Is working to catch up to what appears to be
as we listen in real quickly,
a slip into the launch window, which is currently 2 hours and goes until 3:04 a.m. Eastern time. Now we'll get a solid T0 once the launch team is able to determine how much work is left. But again, it's based on the math and where we are, it looks like we are slipping into the window. But again, that's not official. We don't have a new T0 as of right now. This is Artemis Launch Control.
Yeah, so basically, we're going to probably go into the window. We just don't know how far yet. That's basically what they're saying.
Exactly. And then you have to get into the cutouts. Like when do these little cutouts hit? Some of them are just a few seconds along. There are a few, according to launch director Charlie Blackwell Thompson, there are a few of these cutouts that are a couple minutes long.
Yeah.
So we're really going to have to thread the needle, so to speak, on that one. Going back to what we were saying before, this has been a really long project in the works. I mean, 20 plus years of parts of this thing coming together. The engines that are on this rocket flew on shuttles. So that kind of gives you a little context as to the time that all of this has really taken to get to this point in this rocket. But what is this rocket? What is this rocket going to be doing? And why do we have this unmanned launch? Well, this is just the beginning of a very, very impressive and incredible amount of work that is still to come from NASA. So I thought it would be pretty cool to start off with a little bit of Artemis 101.
Artemis is the Greek goddess of the moon and twin sister to Apollo. And as the namesake for NASA's new deep space exploration program, it's a nod to where we're going and where we've been.
It's one small step for man.
And to all of us that gaze up at the moon, dreaming of the day humankind returns to the lunar surface, folks, we're here. We are going back. And that journey, our journey, begins with Artemis 1.
Artemis 1, the first flight bringing together the most powerful rocket in the world with a new human space capsule and all the upgraded infrastructure back here on Earth to make it a success. NASA built this mission on a solid foundation of know-how, creating more power, more technology, and more capability to propel us farther from Earth than ever before. There are 4 objectives with this uncrewed first flight. Priority 1 is making sure the Orion space capsule returns safely, and it's no small feat. Orion will be coming in faster and hotter than any human-capable spacecraft before, reaching speeds of up to 25,000 miles per hour and temperatures of up to 5,000 degrees. Engineers will closely follow how Orion's heat shield performs. Its re-entry conditions are so extreme, no facility on Earth can recreate them. This will truly be a one-of-a-kind test. Next, retrieving the Orion capsule after splashdown. Nothing will give engineers better information for how Orion performed than the capsule itself. They will also retrieve the parachutes that slowed its descent through the atmosphere. Third, testing out all that new gear. From the launch pad to the rocket system's precision time separation, the capsule's navigation, and of course the return to Earth, every facet of hardware and software debuted in this new era of space exploration will be scrutinized. And of course, there's a lot of science packed in, even if people are not. And the experiments on board, from deploying mini satellites to how intense radiation will affect electronics and future astronauts, there's more than just rocket science happening here. On its 43-day journey, Artemis 1 will cover 1.3 million miles, equivalent to more than 50 trips around the world. And this is just the critical first step of several, with eyes set on a lunar outpost and beyond in the next decade.
But our eyes are focused, not the immediate future, but out there. It's a future where NASA will land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. And on these increasingly complex missions, astronauts will live and work in deep space and will develop the science and technology to send the first humans to Mars.
It's hard to believe, isn't it? I mean, when they say, you know, increasingly complex, they are meaning increasingly complex. These are incredible missions that they're talking about. And, you know, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, who you saw there in the piece, is such a perfect leader for this. Yeah. You know, he was on the shuttle that launched just before Columbia launched. He was on that crew. They scrubbed 4 times on the launch pad while they were strapped into their seats. So you can imagine all the time and the pomp and circumstance to get out to the launch pad, get in the seats, get strapped in all the suits and everything, and get tied in, and then they just sit and wait. And 4 times they didn't get to launch. And then finally they did launch. And it was, you know, a successful mission. The one right after that, that's when the big problems really started. And actually, I believe it was Challenger. It was right before Challenger, not Columbia. He was on that mission right before Challenger, which, you know, interestingly enough, they just found another piece of that, we find out not too long ago. So, you know, it's all about getting it right. And that's why we've had these delays that we have been seeing already. You know, back in August, it was a major fueling snafu that they had a problem with. Then, well, first it was they thought they had an engine problem, but they didn't. Then a major fueling snafu. And so, here we are today. The fueling has gone phenomenally well today, even with the little leak that was not on the rocket side. It was on the mobile launcher side of the bottom of the rocket. And as we just heard Daryl say not too long ago, we're topping off and we're full, and now we wait, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as the public at large, we've kind of been spoiled by how technology works, that they just want everything to work the first time. But I think you brought up a good point, Betsy, that these delays and these kind of safety precautions is actually the way it's supposed to work. NASA is testing these things. They don't want this to be something that is destroyed. There's a lot of science on there. There's a lot of money on this rocket. So they want this to go off, even though there's no humans on this, to go off flawlessly. So these delays and these reschedules are actually part of the safety procedures that NASA wants to go through. They want to get it right. I remember tonight I was posting about another delay, and someone joked, 50 years ago we did this with people on it. It's like, yeah, but remember Apollo 1, 3 people died. All right, Apollo 13 never made it to the moon and almost lost Apollo 13. So it wasn't like it was that easy back then, and things are much more complex now. And I think we've learned a lot of lessons over the last 50 years about how to get these rockets into space. And let's not forget, this is the most powerful rocket on the planet. If something goes wrong, it is not going to go a little wrong. It's going to be spectacularly wrong. So you want to make sure you get it right.
It is. And, the other thing to remember is this thing you have in your hand is more powerful than all of the computer power that they had for Apollo.
Yeah.
So it's one of those wow moments when you really start to think about that. And they just have all kinds of new parts that they have put into this Artemis rocket. But interestingly enough, all they have been doing is building on where they have been in the past. This is NASA's true hallmark of science, right? Yeah. They make something, and then they figure out new ways to make it better and build off of it. And that's what this entire rocket that we are watching on the launch pad is. It has been a long road to get to this point of a technological build and development that we are certainly going to be keeping an eye on. I don't know why that light just changed that way. That'll be interesting to find out. But, getting to that rocket and getting that rocket to that launch pad, it has been a long road. And so let's take a little bit of a journey back and take a look at the road to this launch pad.
You may notice that some of the components of this Artemis 1 rocket look familiar. The core stage and solid rocket boosters look like those of the space shuttles, and the Orion capsule sure does look like the Apollo capsules that took astronauts to the moon in the 60s and 70s. NASA has taken tried and true designs, upsized them, and outfitted them with the modern technology to make this Artemis mission a reality. But it's a delicate balance between progress and protection.
We're building a little bit at a time. And when humans are involved, innovation happens at a pace that still keeps them safe. So that's a tough balance. After each one of these missions, we have to innovate. We have to learn. That's why we do a test flight. That's why we do an uncrewed test flight before we put crew on there.
All right, so, just to kind of put it into perspective, you have engines that flew on shuttles, multiple missions on shuttles that have all been retooled. If you'll remember, shuttle had 3 of those RS-25 engines. Artemis has 4. Solid rocket boosters, yep. Boy, doesn't that look reminiscent of the old shuttle days? I mean, there's a lot of parts from, the various missions that have been before that have come into this rocket, including the Orion capsule itself. They went back to an Apollo era design style, and then they've outfitted it with all kinds of new stuff. I mean, Alexa is on board, and they've got all kinds of stuff that they've set up with the mannequins, or moonikins as they are calling them. So it really is amazing to see all of these parts that have come together.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting today, just looking at some of the manufacturers and the different private industry that's involved in this project as well, from Boeing, obviously, Northrop Grumman. You've got a lot of private industry that is involved with this compared to the past when it was all NASA doing everything. And one of the things I thought was interesting was, from an inflation-adjusted standpoint, even though this is billions of dollars over budget, Betsy, it's still cheaper than the Apollo mission so far. And what I thought was interesting, CNBC did a study that unlike Apollo, and Apollo did spawn a lot of industry and a lot of capitalism afterwards, that they estimate that this whole mission and then the mission to the moon is going to end up being $1 trillion recouping of money because of the jobs and the technology that they will advance from this. So I think when people see these big numbers, they think, well, we're wasting this money. Well, no, in the long term, this is actually going to all be recouped. We're going to all make money. And some of the science that comes out of this is just going to be unbelievable. I mean, the science on this mission alone is pretty incredible. Even though there's no humans on this test flight, there's still a ton of science going on.
Yeah, that's right, Megan.
Yeah.
So we are clearly in a delay
Here's an
now.
update.
The NASA
Yep.
test director, who's basically flying the ship for the launch countdown tonight, has said that we are extending the hold that we were currently in at T-minus 10 minutes and counting. And so that puts terminal count at T-minus Eastern Time launch. We're now slipping indefinitely into the hold. And NASA test director Carlos Monge saying that we are currently estimating how much work needs to be done before resuming the polling that is supposed to take place 15 minutes before launch. It then goes to terminal count at T-minus 10 minutes. Now we've got an update on the tanking of the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank. Currently 95% filled. We're in topping on that tank. It is the last of 4 tanks in the Space Launch System that needed to be completely fueled up before we launch. Of course, cryogenic tanking, a complex operation that has seen some delays tonight. We had a roughly hour delay after a replenish valve on the core stage liquid hydrogen side required hands-on work by a Red Crew team that went out to the launch pad and tightened down some bolts on the valve fixed before leaving the launch, and then launch team verifying that work was complete. Now currently we're awaiting some work with the range. The 45th Space Wing, which oversees the range here, makes sure that the airspace and the ocean out over the flight path is clear, and also has the responsibility to destruct the rocket should it go off track. They have been working on some issues with their equipment and sending a flight termination signal to the rocket. There is testing that must happen with the flight termination system that was delayed by a bad Ethernet switch. Switch has been changed out, and now the range is looking to start testing their connectivity to the rocket in order to preserve that safety function that they are responsible for. So again, we are slipping now indefinitely into the launch window. We're awaiting the launch team to evaluate just how much time is required to complete the work to get this rocket ready to launch. And of course, when we have a new T0 for you, we'll report that out right away. Megan, back to you.
Wow. Indefinite
We'll
doesn't sound promising.
Well, no, actually, it's because they don't want to put any, estimates out there. So, this is all to do with that flight termination system, which we got really lucky. This is where Ian kind of gave NASA a bit of a bailout, because NASA's flight termination system batteries were coming to their end.
Yeah.
And it requires a rollback to the VAB to replace those, to recharge everything. And it's not exactly a very simple process. So we had the delay, and the scrubs that kind of had stacked things up, and we pressed the limit on those flight termination batteries. Then you throw a hurricane into it, and they were like, all right, well, we're just going to roll it back. And it gave them an opportunity to do a whole bunch of things. Number one, they got to replace those valves that they were having problems with and test those. They got to change out or charge up those flight termination batteries. They also got to recharge some of the Cubesats, the payloads that are inside that rocket. So there's basically, I think it's 12 or 14 shoebox-sized satellites with a whole bunch of different experiments or demonstrations that are kind of tucked into a collar that attaches the upper stage of the rocket to the core stage. And once everything starts to separate, then, you know, those little shoebox sized CubeSats get shot off into space to go live their merry life and do their thing. And some of those have obviously had some issues because of this long wait, and they were able to get some of those recharged too. So it worked out fairly well. The real big problem that they're facing now is not just this flight termination system. Now they can't, you know, we've got the batteries replaced. Now there's this faulty switch and whatnot. So that's all going to get worked out. We're also up against the end of the quote, let's just say called the expiration date for the solid rocket boosters.
Yeah.
That's coming up in December. And it's like mid-December, I think it is, 12th or 15th, I think. And it's basically, you know, those solid rocket boosters in their configuration that they're in right now, they're stacked with that fuel. And at, you know, the end date, that expiration date, they're supposed to be taken apart or at least switched out and redone. So there's a lot that's obviously riding on this thing, not just the testing and, you know, the future of the entire Artemis program, but there's so much technology that's packed in here. Let me go back to those Cubesats for just a moment. There's a whole bunch of different demonstrations that are taking place and scientific experiments that are going out. I had a chance to talk to the CEO of one of the groups that have a CubeSat on this amazing rocket, Team Miles, and their demonstration is definitely something that just kind of makes you go, wow.
Team Miles, a volunteer group led by Wes Failer, hopes to prove that everyday civilians have the right stuff.
We ourselves had a wacky idea for a plasma thruster, a new kind of rocket motor for a satellite.
Failer is describing his team's Cubesat, a satellite the size of 2 loaves of bread that may be low cost but offers enormous potential to push science forward.
The business end is these couple little holes here. It's a little pink jet comes out of those and, you know, pushes the thing along. And we put 12 of them on the spacecraft. And when you spread them along the length of the craft and give them a little tilt, then you can light up pairs of them and you can turn the craft.
A new plasma thruster isn't the only tech test Team Miles will be trying.
It's going to run actually some high school and college STEM experiments in deep space weather. There's a group of students contributed a little gizmo. So we invented special software for that communication at extreme range. And we're going to be 8 to 10 million kilometers from Earth, so way past the moon.
If successful, Wes and his team could be in line for prize money and hard-earned recognition.
Our biggest challenge is getting the experts who think they know everything to acknowledge and accept something that's literally world-changing in terms of this small little world of electric thrust.
Big dreams packed into a shoebox-sized package.
I've yet to really embrace that looking up at the sky, but to think one of those stars could be ours.
Isn't that incredible? A
That is
credit
amazing.
card sized electric thruster, and it's running on extremely low power.
Yeah.
And it's just enough to get things to move around. I mean, in space, you know, you play by different rules of physics than we do here on Earth. And so it's just really cool that they have that ability.
Yeah, I'm just looking, you know, as we were running that story, I'm looking at, you know, some of the updates from NASA. It doesn't sound like, I mean, compared to the issues we had with the leaks back in August, some of these issues they're having tonight, now that we've got the other valve fixed with the red crew, it doesn't sound like these are issues that are nearly as, I think, dire as what we had back in August, because it sounds like if we can get the communication back to the termination switch, I think, I mean, I'm optimistic. I don't know, maybe I just want this thing to go off, but it does sound like at least they probably have some optimism that they're going to try to launch tonight, as long as they can get these problems fixed, because they don't seem to be as big as issues. That fuel leak that we had, man, that was just seemed to be a major issue. And at one point, like you said, Betsy, they thought it was an engine issue, which you're like, oh my gosh, they tested these engines down in the Michigan plant down in Mississippi, and you think, okay, they're tested. What happened? Well, they put them on the rocket, now they don't work, but ended up being just, you know, another leak issue. And then tonight's leak issue, as you said, wasn't directly with the rocket. It was with the, you know, trying to replenish the overflow from the mobile pad. And now this communication issue, just an Ethernet switch, which seems like a simple thing. Anybody who's had internet connectivity issues at home, you know how that goes. Sometimes an Ethernet switch goes bad, but now they got to test the connection to make sure, because the termination signal is pretty key, because as they track this, if something bad, that basically they need an abort signal to be able to get to the rocket so they can self-destruct or guide it away from land. So that seems like a pretty, I mean, not being down there seems like an easier fix than what we had back in August.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like reconnecting to your phone to the network, right?
Yeah.
Do a restart, see what happens. I mean, that's truly what's happening. When you replace hardware on a computer system, you have to do a restart.
Yep.
These are some pretty sophisticated systems. They have to restart. And then there's a process that they're going to have to go through to make sure all of the, communications are happening. The proper channels are all being made. And then, they have all kinds of safety failures and all different things that they have to make sure it'll flag when it needs to flag. And so, they know what they're doing. And when they said 70 minutes to replace an Ethernet switch, my first thought was, well, dang, that must be some really fancy hardware.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I did not start to think about the software implications of that and how they're going to have to do the restarts on all that stuff. So we wait and we watch. We're going to be patient, because that's what we have, right? And we're still within the window, even with that 70 to 90 minute time that we kind of were ballparked with on that possibility of a hold. So it's funny, people are immediately naysayers and poo-pooing the possibility of it going off. There's a reason there's a 2-hour window, and anywhere in that 2-hour window it can launch, even if it's up to the last 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And they can stop this at any time until the solid rocket boosters fire. Once the solid rocket boosters fire, that rocket is going somewhere, and there's nobody that can do anything to stop it except the flight termination system, and that's why it's so critical.
Yeah, and I was joking earlier tonight. I mean, this is the biggest firework in the world right now. If that thing goes off, it's going. There's no stopping it there. So getting everything under control tonight, getting all these little gremlins worked out is part of the process. But it does feel like, compared to August, it felt like, every time they would come on and say, hey, we've got this issue, it always seemed like it was something bigger than they were letting on. Tonight, these seem like more minor things. It doesn't seem like I said, like there's something bigger icue going on, because these are what you typically used to see with the shuttle launches. You'd see these minor setbacks during the launch window. Yeah, we got to, there's some icing, or we're waiting for this, and it would go off sometime within the launch window. Back in August, you just got the feeling as watching that first window, like, yeah, there's something bigger going on here. I don't think it's going off tonight. Tonight feels different to me for some reason.
Yeah, so they did a series of wet dresses, which is where they fuel the rocket, or at least they attempt to, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happened. We never got to fully fill the rocket. And so those wet dresses weren't exactly, they did get it, but it never was kind of in that live test.
Yeah.
And so when we get to launch attempt number 1, and we got to where they did the engine kick bleed, engine kick bleed starts, one of those word configurations, which is basically where they start cooling the engines so that they don't crack when they fire the engines.
Yep.
That was a faulty sensor. So they ended up not having a problem with the engines.
Yeah.
When you start talking about liquid hydrogen leaks, that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
Especially when you're saying, this is a pressurized line. So there's a little bit of a cool physics trick that NASA is doing every time they fill this rocket. You're using liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Hydrogen is the smallest molecule. It's the lightest, and it can get through the tiniest of fissures and cracks.
Yeah.
So they have to be very cognizant of good seals and just make sure everything is perfect on that. Well, obviously, if we have a big leak, it's not perfect. So we knew we had an issue with that. Liquid hydrogen is pumped into this rocket, and the liquid oxygen is also pumped in. Liquid oxygen is thicker, and it takes longer to load. Even though there's less of it in the rocket, it takes a longer load time. So they're trying to kind of keep that rocket in balance as they're doing this loading simultaneously. So that's why it kind of takes so long. When we had the problems with the pressurization of the liquid hydrogen fuel line on the second go, which is when, you know, they basically blew the seal, and they had to go out and replace gaskets and whatnot, which they were able to do at the pad. Then they were able to do a full tanking after that. So that was when they really got to do that big wet dress, got everything fueled up. They found out everything worked. The problem was that, you know, they initially, like I said, they blew that gasket, and the rocket was partially filled with hydrogen. Well, the same line that fills the rocket is the line that is used to drain the rocket. So then they had, you know, hydrogen sitting in the rocket, they couldn't get it out. And there were just all kinds of little issues. They had to wait for all that to boil off, and then they could finally get started again. So it's really a tedious process, and there's all these holds and, you know, checks and balances and all these various things that they have to make sure all of the T's are crossed and all of the I's are dotted. And they will not light those engines until that is what it is. We get an update now.
Was studying.
Oh, this is a good
and
sign.
That's the possible liberation, as they say, of some RTV, room temperature vulcanization, essentially caulk that is around the Orion, between Orion and panels that come off to reveal the solar panels for the Orion and European service module. The problem is essentially this: the caulk has a sensor in it, and it through camera inspections of the rocket, they have been able to determine that it is loose and could potentially come off. This is the same issue that was brought before a mission management team, which evaluates additional risks to the rocket, just a day ago. This happened after Hurricane Nicole passed through and delaminated some of the caulk around the bottom of Orion that connects to those panels. The team has determined that this caulk that encompasses this sensor on Orion is likely to come off after launch. And so the engineering team went and did a full analysis on what that debris trajectory could be once it comes off. And they evaluated that it falls within the same amount of risk that was evaluated by the mission management team a day ago. And so with no additional risk, that constraint has been removed. The engineers going on further to say that the RTV, as was discussed a day ago, is a loose and pliable material that is unlikely to cause a higher risk due to damage. They say it's likely to hit the LVSA, which is the adapter, the cone-shaped adapter that meets Orion and comes down, and the ICPS, and then comes down to the core stage. It is a rigid structure that would be able to withstand the impact of that RTV. So that constraint was just removed after discussion between engineers and the NASA test director, launch director, and mission management chair Mike Serafin. And so now we continue on. We are slipping into the launch window. Currently 9 minutes into the launch window, which ends at 3:04 a.m. Eastern Time. The team is currently evaluating the work they have left to do and how much time it will take them to complete it before they can start polling for go. That would normally happen 15 minutes before launch, and we are not ready to resume that polling at this moment. And so we are going into the window. The question is, how deep are we going into the window? A rough calculation of the work, and this is a rough calculation, just for the benefit of those who are watching and those who are here to watch the launch, is no earlier than 1:45 a.m. That again is a rough estimation. This work has to be evaluated, calculated, and a new T0 given, and currently at this moment we don't have that.
Okay.
Just want to be real clear about that.
All right. Well, that's the first. Like, we got some info there. So folks that were listening in there, we heard a lot about that caulking material, and that was something we were worried about because Hurricane Nicole, did cause some minor damage. It wasn't significant, but it was this caulking material, Betsy, right? That's around the Orion capsule. And I guess yesterday they looked at it and said, okay, it could come off, but we're not worried about it. Then tonight they had to get all clear because if you remember the space shuttle disaster, what happened was a piece of foam came off and impacted one of the heat tiles and caused damage on takeoff. And so basically they said this material is so pliable, it's so soft, it would hit the cone on top of one of the solid, the top of the rocket or near the top, and that's a very rigid material, so it wouldn't cause significant damage. So they basically had to give an all clear, like we're okay with the tolerances with that. And now it sounds like they're going through the other checklists and stuff, and we got kind of an estimate, but not a real estimate, but no earlier than 1:45 a.m. because they've got to go through this 15-minute process before they even really start the countdown again, right?
Yeah, so they at 15 minutes to launch, they'll do a poll, and this is historic because, of course, Charlie Blackwell Thompson, the first female launch director for NASA, so for her to call that poll is a very significant historical event. And then at 10 minutes, that's where it's like really watching everything take place, and as it starts to count down, of course, you get to T0 and she's gone. So there's not a lot of wiggle room. So the more that they can kind of get out of the way now, and they don't have to worry about it once they're back in that countdown, it's going to be better for them. I think the other interesting part of this is it sounds like he was talking about a different part of the RTV coming off. So basically, it's a type of a silicone that they use, and it's very thin, less than 1/4 of an inch in thickness, that goes around the entire circumference of the rocket, and it's only a couple inches wide. So think about a very long piece of tape almost that goes around, and it doesn't have any insulating properties per se. What it is there for, more or less, is aerodynamics, and so that they don't have to have. So when we talk about it's only rocket science, this is how precise they have to get. I mean, there's little like gaps where there's a seam between two parts of this rocket, and in order to keep that as smooth as possible for aerodynamic reasons, they use this RTV material, this caulking tape material, to kind of smooth that out. They get concerned if there is a little bubble there, an indentation, because that can cause the air to speed up, and it kind of wraps around, and it causes heat from frictional forcing. And heat on the outside of the rocket, it's already going to be having a lot of heat going on. So anything that they can do to mitigate additional heat is a good thing, and especially at a critical point in the rocket, like your Orion capsule sitting there.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's also protecting a sensor there for the solar array, and so that was the other concern. You're right, Betsy. You think about the little things that go on, because if you change any of the aerodynamics or the drag on this rocket, it can throw off the trajectory. It could cause the power to be disrupted. So, I mean, because like you said, this has been calculated. This is the amount of thrust and fuel we need. If you start slowing it down or putting forces on one side of the rocket versus the other, it can veer off course. So it might seem like a small thing, but when you're talking about how fast this thing's going, that's a big deal. Now, it sounds like they're okay, with that right now, and they're just running through these other checklists behind the scenes. And so it does sound like they're running through this testing to make sure everything's good to go. The fueling's still going on, as you mentioned. I think if there was a major issue, they wouldn't be continuously fueling the rocket, or they are basically preparing to launch this, it sounds like to me. And 1:45 is actually not that bad. That's only, 40 minutes into the window, so it's not horrible. It'll probably go past that, but that still gives us plenty of time, because remember, the window's open to 3:04 in the morning. And as you mentioned earlier, I mean, they will launch at the very last minute if they have to. They'll get to the point where they can't launch, but they'll use every available minute of this launch window if they have to.
Yep. And it's just a matter of waiting it out, and they're going to be very patient in doing so. So we're the ones that are impatient.
Yeah.
I know they're excited to make this happen, but we're just, it's hard to be patient when you just don't know everything. And the people in the room, they're in the room where it happened.
Yeah.
A little Hamilton side job there, but they're the ones who are ultimately going to be making this decision and bearing the responsibility of that decision should something happen. So I too would probably sit back a little bit and be like, oh, I'm okay if we just kind of wait and see how this one's going to go, and make sure it's all good.
It's amazing. One of the coolest things about pre-launch is I love when they go through the go checklist and everybody has to say, ready to go, go. And you realize any one of those people could basically shut the thing down if they wanted to, because if there's one. So it's, think about having you joke you have a lot of middle management or bosses. Think about having hundreds of bosses, and they all have to get okay for this thing to happen. And so one of them can basically shut the thing down. And so there's just a lot of people. And like you said, nobody wants to be the one that's responsible for something going wrong. So if I'm in charge of this one thing, I'm making sure it's 100% right before we launch this thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do want to go back to what we started to talk about earlier, which is the technology that comes out of this. It's fascinating to me that people think that the only thing NASA does is make rockets and launch those rockets. There's so much R&D, research and development, and innovation and invention that goes into every single part of these rockets. And so it's a whole section of NASA called spin-offs. They actually track exactly how all of their innovation and all of their invention gets sold to small businesses and the greater public, and how it is being used. So take a look here. This is an interesting little bit of information for everybody about just a few of the more notable spin-offs that you may recognize.
With a vision to explore the secrets of the universe for the benefit of all, NASA's #1 mission isn't to get men and women back to the moon and on to Mars. Their mission statement is to explore the unknown in air and space, innovate for the benefit of humanity, and inspire the world through discovery. And with their discovery comes an abundance of benefits for all of us. Aside from fun, freeze-dried foods, satellite TV, and the GPS that keeps you going in the right direction, and COVID-battling air purifiers, LED lighting, exercise equipment, and insulation for every kind of application and environment, you can definitely say NASA technology is a part of your everyday life. As a matter of fact, you may have NASA innovation in the palm of your hand right now. From the circuitry inside to the network that carries the signal, cell phones are what they are today because of technology developed by NASA. And the technology that gave us this picture of Buzz Aldrin standing on the moon, or the stunning images of nebula in distant galaxies, or our first looks at the surface of Mars, it's the same technology in your cell phone that you use to take a selfie. But you have so much more space in your life than you realize. If there's one thing we all appreciate, it's being comfortable, and many are, thanks to NASA's development of temper foam to improve comfort and crash survivability for passenger jets and space shuttles. When NASA made the formula available to the public, 2 Scandinavian countries merged to become Tempur-Pedic. Memory foam is used in everything from bedding and furniture to shoes, clothes, even earplugs. In an effort to keep astronauts comfortable in the extremes of space, NASA looked to phase change materials known as PCMs that would absorb and release heat inside a spacesuit. The microcapsule PCMs ended up not being the right fit for astronauts, but have found their way into athletic wear, sleeping bags, and underwear, and it's become a lifesaver, for low birth weight infants around the world. The same microelectronics developed for vibration control during stress testing of space hardware during launch and re-entry came in handy when it came time to develop digital controls for tankless water heaters. The coding for those microcontrollers is similar to commands developed for shuttle missions and allows for the water to be at the right temperature without using excessive energy. NASA innovation has led to medical breakthroughs for imaging, sutures, and biometric analysis. Yep, that wellness monitor on your wrist is a commercial usage of NASA tech. The list is seemingly endless, but the innovation and invention will never stop. So who knows where NASA will take us or how they will help us in the future.
Hey,
I just thought that was so cool. The
I'm all
circuitry
about
on
the
a space
Tempur-Pedic
shuttle
bed,
is
Betsy.
running your water heater.
No, I'm like, the Tempur-Pedic bed, that's a lifesaver. So that's worth the mission alone right there.
Exactly. And I mean, think about all the other uses, the material in wicking, sportswear and whatnot. It's truly amazing. All of the ways that NASA is truly a part of everyday life.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of the experiments you said that are going on and that will happen on the moon, they're just easier to do in weightlessness because it's like science experiments. You want to take away some of the variables, and if you can take away gravity, it lets you test things much easier than you can on Earth. So, a lot of these testing that goes on up there is going to end up being huge innovations for us, and you're just seeing some innovations in this rocket alone. It's going to be amazing to me to watch us go back to the moon with modern technology. If you think about our parents growing up during the space race to the moon with the Russians, and everyone's sitting around a TV and watching that signal come back. Now we're all going to be sitting there watching on our phones in almost like HD. Yeah. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be such a juxtaposition. And one of the cool things about tonight, I think it was 50 years to the date Apollo 17 went through their wet dressing the same exact day. 50 years ago to the date. It's pretty stunning that it's been 50 years and we're going back. I just, it's for me and you, and I know a lot of people out there watching that are up late. It's really exciting because this is a cool thing. I mean, this is something that I think everyone can get excited for. And I told my kids all the time, you guys are going to be growing up when we're going to Mars, and you guys, this is going to be your space race. And so for us getting back to the moon is that first step. And I think that's the next thing that we got to look forward to, that we could go to another planet because of this mission. It's going to be incredible.
Well, and here's the thing, you just don't know how this rocket leaving Earth will impact kids and what they're going to be doing in the future. And it's so easy to focus on the rocket and lose focus on the people who are such a part of this. They're really the heart and soul that's building this mission and making it all happen. And one of the people that is really critical to this whole thing is actually from here in Cleveland. His name is Jim Free. We saw him in one of the stories just a few minutes ago. He's the Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems Development. Let me say it again. Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems Development. Basically, he is the one that is overseeing all of the development of all of the pieces parts for this entire mission and for all space exploration. So it's truly like he's like a number 2 in NASA. Wow. And so it's so amazing to get to know these people because they truly are human beings and they all have a story as to why they're doing what they're doing. I had a chance to sit down with Jim Free for an exclusive one-on-one interview. I'm going to share that with you now.
I'm Jim Free. I'm the Exploration Systems Development Mission Director at Associate Administrator. This is a long title.
Long but fitting, considering Jim Free oversees systems development for every facet of the Artemis program. It's a big job and one he has worked toward for a very long time.
We lived on the flight path to Cleveland Hopkins, and I could watch planes land every day and read about the shuttle.
Born and raised in Cam's Corners on Cleveland's west side, Free's passion for space and flight stayed with him through 4 years at St. Ignatius High School and on to Ohio's Miami University. But his pursuit of an aeronautical degree wasn't always easy.
Is this where we can talk about you getting a D in your first physics class in college?
No, I prefer not to talk about that. Yeah, it's.
Is there a little bit of a perseverance message to go along
There's
with that?
quite a bit of that. Yeah, there's quite a bit of. I've like called my mom, like, I got this D, and she's like, all right, just come home. And I'm like, I'm not coming home. I'm gonna work through this.
That same tenacity propelled Free through 30-plus years with NASA, eventually leading him back home to Cleveland's NASA Glenn Research Center, where by 2013, he'd risen to center director in just 7 years.
Senator Glenn, like just being the center director here was so much pressure, representing him after having the chance to meet him and Mrs. Glenn.
Free took retirement in 2017, but it didn't last long.
When I was asked to take the job, you know, I was thinking, should I take this job? Should I go back? Is this the right job for me? And then I saw somebody's post somewhere that said, I just got my dream internship with NASA for 2 months. And I said, how can I not take this job? It's the coolest job in the world.
Who was the person that was your role model? Who did you look up to?
That's a tough one. There's probably a few. Certainly my mom. She put me in a position to do the stuff I'm doing today. You know, my family today is just a huge support to come back and take this job. We would have these discussions as a family. I told them this one and they're like, you know, you got to go back.
What's been the most frustrating thing?
I don't think I'm allowed to say that on camera. I think the frustrating thing sometimes for us that work in a bureaucracy is the bureaucracy. But you go through that to get to the end.
There's that tenacity again. So the end goal for Free? Seeing Artemis do what he knows it can.
What are you most excited about? Like, what's the moment that you are
Splashdown.
looking forward to?
Splashdown. There's a lot of ways I really want to get the 42-day mission, but I don't know if I can go 42 days without breathing and eating. But for Artemis 1, I don't think I will breathe easy until that splashdown happens.
So cool to get to talk to him. We have a huge update coming out of Firing Room 1 right now. We have a new T0 sometime possibly between 1:45 and 2 minutes. The polling is expected to start up here very soon, so we'll definitely want to listen in on that.
Picture of our T0.
So Daryl Nail was saying that there are 40 cutouts that are in this launch window that they have to accommodate in order to set this new T0. So
NASA's test
everything is
director has
constantly moving.
informed the launch team to all switch to a common communication channel. It's called 230.
This is huge.
That's a good sign.
232.
Yep.
And what this means is that the entire launch team is now on one channel, and all future communication will happen there, whereas there are many channels. Now they reduce it down to one. Just heard from NASA test director Carlos Monge. I'm sorry, Jeff Spaulding. Jeff Spaulding's on. They swapped out. There are currently no constraints to launch.
Wow.
Great news.
Yes.
There it is.
Again,
All right.
no constraints to launch. And they're getting ready to pick up with a poll to determine readiness for launch.
That's
So
awesome.
this is where Charlie Blackwell Thompson will go one by one through each of the consoles there in Firing Room 1 to ask if their system is go or no go for launch. And this is the first time this will be done by a woman. So it's very exciting.
I mean, that's the best news we've had in a while. I mean, it sounds,
Yeah.
that sounds great.
It's definitely good. And it'll take a couple minutes for her to go through each of these steps. This is kind of the old school. You saw this in, the Apollo 13 movie and everything, go, no go, and the setup for everything.
Okay.
It is truly
Test
historic.
Director Jeff Spaulding getting ready to conduct the readiness poll, so we are getting close.
Yes.
We're going to pull up the audio now so that you can listen
Firing
in.
Room 1 is about 4 miles from the launch pad, just so people have a little context.
Rockets go.
All right.
All right, copy all. And Launch Director NTD, our launch team is ready to proceed at this time.
I copy all NTD. At this time, I will proceed with my poll.
All right, let's
do it. Go girl.
And attention on 232, this is the launch director performing the final poll for launch. Verify no constraints and go for launch. EGS, Program Chief Engineer.
EGS Program Chief Engineer verifies that the EGS, SLS, and Orion Program Chief Engineers have no constraints and are go for launch.
Yes.
Copy, Greg. Thank you. EGS Chief Safety Officer.
The EGS CSO verifies the SLS, Orion, and EGS CSOs have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, John. Thank you. Range weather.
Weather has no constraints and weather is go for launch.
Yes.
Copy, LWO. And Mission Manager.
Come on.
And Mission Manager, Launch Director.
Launch Director, Mission Manager on 232. The mission management team has been polled. You have a go to proceed with terminal count and launch of Artemis 1.
That's Mike Serafin.
I copy all. Thank you. And NTD, Launch Director.
Go ahead, Launch Director.
Yes, sir. On behalf of all the men and women across our great nation who have worked to bring this hardware together to make this day possible, and for the Artemis generation, this is for you. At this time, I give you a go to resume count and launch Artemis 1.
Yes.
Copy, Launch Director, and thank you. All right, we do have a couple of steps to configure, and then we will be ready to resume the clock. CVSE, NTD. CVSE here. Initiate recording of Orion cameras at this time. In work. R, NTD.
RSR here.
Perform the booster ignition SNA arm rotation enable.
NDT, RSR, booster ignition SNA arm and rotation enable is complete.
And I copy. Thank you.
Okay, so there you heard the poll from Launch
Director. All right,
Director.
and all personnel, we are going to resume the clock here momentarily.
I'll feel better when I see the clock ticking down.
Getting ready to get that new T0 time.
It's coming. They're just making sure those cutouts are all accounted for.
Yeah.
And it is very specific.
Was the NASA test director's poll. And
all right, and we have verified no cutouts at this time. And all personnel, we are going to resume the clock.
There it is.
GLS, you can resume the clock on your mark.
GLS copies. Countdown clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. GLS mainline has been initiated.
Okay.
T-minus 10 minutes and counting.
We are T-minus 10 minutes away from liftoff of Artemis 1. As you can see, the clock is now moving. Let's put that up. T-minus 9 minutes and 47 seconds. The L-minus 15 poll complete.
Show 06:47:44 is the new liftoff time.
Affirm.
Okay.
You can see
so what you're looking at there
1:47:44, 1:47
media.
a.m. Eastern time and 44 seconds.
You see all the people scrambling out there to get to their spaces now for to see this.
So yeah, so I was down there in August for the first 2 launch attempts, and it's pandemonium. It's like Hunger Games out there for your spot. So once you get your spot, you put stuff there, whether it's a tripod or a chair or whatever. And so everybody's kind of getting all their cameras powered up because you have to conserve battery, right? So you're trying to kind of play this game.
Yeah, I assume a lot of the photographers were doing that. They had to go back and recharge because they probably were out there for so long getting ready,
Yeah. Everybody sits and waits in their cars because there's only the international media is supposed to be in the media center because obviously they're from out of town.
Yeah.
And
I didn't hear, like,
they have to be bussed
Did you hear
in.
what the crowds are like down there? The public crowds? I wonder if it's
Not nearly as much. So they were doing some video of the Indian River viewing area, which is bleachers there out at Kennedy Space Center. And you could see open spots.
Oh,
I was
wow.
stunned.
Yeah.
I have somebody who tweeted me from Cleveland that said, I'm in Orlando thinking about driving east of 50 miles, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, dude, if you do not go, you will regret it. And he's like, you know, there's a lot of people waiting here. I'm like, traffic's not going to be a beautiful thing going back, but at least you're going to get to see this thing and you'll feel it. I mean, 8 minutes. So let me just put this into context for people. When I was down there the first time, a SpaceX rocket launched with 2 satellites in it. And it was 12 miles from the hotel that I was in. It went up, I saw it, it was amazing, and about a minute later I heard it and then I felt it. That was a little bit freaky.
Wow.
That SpaceX rocket was 1.1 million pounds of thrust. This is 8.8.
Yeah, that's gonna.
So
a lot of people are gonna
12
wake up
miles
here.
away.
Yeah. Boy, that sonic boom's gonna be pretty impressive too.
Yeah, and you know, they had a sonic boom earlier over the weekend with the nobody knows exactly where it came from. May have been a Space Force test plane coming back.
That was the little craft that was up there for 938 days, and it's a secret mission.
Yes.
Nobody really knows.
Yes, nobody knows, but it magically came back down and fired off a huge sonic boom that shook Orlando.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. Okay, let's see what Daryl's saying here.
Ignition and thunderous sound. It could damage the rocket. So the ignition overpressure and sound suppression system will flood the mobile launcher with water. You'll see that sequence start at
400,000 gallons
17
in 20 seconds. It's incredible.
Now coming up in
so you
less
can
than
hear
30
Daryl's
seconds,
voice
the
get a
ground
little more
launch sequencer
excited.
will start bringing the high energy systems online, starting with
picking up
core
his
stage
pace.
pressurization.
You see a lot of venting going on here because they're going to keep pumping in fuel, so it's going to be spraying. All the excess is going to be venting off here.
Yeah, it's boiling because it's so
Fire
cold
one
that liquid
is
oxygen and liquid hydrogen sits in there and
silent.
just boils. And
listen
they're
for the next call.
constantly in that replenish mode, so they have to keep that perfect balance right at 100%. Yes, this is
The core
good.
stage tank is now pressurizing to flight levels.
That's good. That's a great sign.
They were able
The
to do
replenish
this
valve to
before
the liquid
the
hydrogen
rollback,
tank now closing.
for Ian.
The liquid oxygen tank will come a little later. Now we're arming the Orion Ascent pyros and transfer to internal power.
All right, that's big. Internal power now.
The launch abort system, or LAS jettison motor, is now armed. On this flight, the abort motor is inactive because there is no crew on board. Up next is the flight termination system, or FTS, which gives the Space Force the ability to destruct the rocket if it goes in the wrong direction. Let's listen in for that.
GLS is go for FTS arm.
The flight termination system is now armed. Coming up at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, a big moment. This is where the RS-25 engines and their bleed go to high flow. It's been a little tricky to dial in.
GLS is go for LH2 high flow bleed check.
Good word, we've passed that. The cryo team got the LH2 engine bleed pressure loop dialed in. They are now at the right temperature for launch. Countdown continues.
All right.
T-minus
All
4
right.
minutes, 15 seconds.
This is good.
Up next, GLS fires up the CAPUs. Those are high-speed turbines which provide pressure to hydraulic pumps that steer the RS-25s. Stands for Core Stage Auxiliary Power Unit Start.
GLS is go for core stage APU start.
That now leads to the thrust vector control test at T-minus 2 minutes and 30 seconds. That can proceed now, and we will see the engine's gimbal at the bottom of the core stage.
Yeah. It's really cool. They all four move independently or together.
At T-minus 3 minutes and 10 seconds, you will hear the go for purge sequence 4. That's a helium purge of the 4 core stage engines downstream of the propellant valve, getting the air and moisture out.
All in all, this is not going to be that big of a delay if they go off here before 10 till.
GLS
I mean,
go for purge sequence 4.
It's 1:47 and 44
GLS
seconds.
The core stage locks
They're
vent,
going.
liquid oxygen.
Unless something last second here.
Yeah, this
Again, as soon as those solid rocket boosters fire, that's it.
Yep.
He's gone.
See it coming out there now.
we're getting to that point of no return where they're going to be launching regardless, like you said.
And there it goes. It's
So here's
closed.
that helium
Locks vent
coming out.
closed.
Yep.
Pressure rising in the core stage locks tank.
See the gimbling of the
level.
engines?
Oh yeah, look at that.
Coming up in 15
Wow.
seconds. Look for that thrust vector control actuator test. Engines will gimbal.
I cannot fathom the energy in the firing room right now.
And there they go. The 4 core stage RS-25 engines gimbaling around, testing the
Oh, that's
ability
so cool.
to steer the rocket into space.
Yeah, people think those are just static
They will
engines.
operate
They
at
move. They can
109
actually steer this thing.
performance.
So it's amazing.
Each RS-25 throwing down 500,000 pounds of thrust. All 4, 2 million pounds. All together with the boosters, 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
GLS go for upper stage to internal power.
Now the upper stage has
2
gone to
minutes.
internal power. So power is removed from the rocket's upper stage, the ICPS, and it's been switched to battery power. The same milestone is coming up for the core stage at T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds.
So all of the arms that are holding the rocket right now will retract once those solid rocket boosters fire. That everything will be off of it, and it's moving. So it's a real tedious time.
The rocket's core stage, which houses the 3 flight computers, is now on battery power. So there is no more hold time available because there's no more margin on the batteries. So if we have a hold, we'd have to recycle back to T-minus 10 minutes and recharge those batteries. The count continues. A note now, shortly after liftoff.
1 minute.
1 minute.
Shortly after liftoff, Mission Control Houston will take control of the rocket, and my colleague, Leah Cheshire, will take over commentary. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. Coming up at T-minus 33 seconds, the GLS will hand off control to the ALS. This is the autonomous launch sequencer. On board the rocket, it will take over command and control of the rocket. But the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
GLS go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now flowing under the ML. And here we go.
Again,
10.
Hydrogen sparks to burn off.
7.
400,000 gallons of water. Oh my God, guys.
3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
Oh, guys, it's going.
Oh, look at all that.
5 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour.
That's amazing.
Carrying good control.
Looks so much like a shuttle launch because of those solid rocket
Now
boosters.
30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle
Same
to pass
engines
the max
too.
Q
I
in
mean,
about
just
1 minute and
so
9 seconds
reminiscent
into
when you look
launch.
at it.
This is the greatest period of
Now, those solid rocket boosters are burning 6 tons of propellant per second.
SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in mission control. The 4 core stage engines throttling down ahead of passing through max Q.
Max Q is the highest forcing on the vehicle itself.
Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust.
Just spectacular.
The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour.
That's incredible.
Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter.
Oh my.
Spectacular. Oh my goodness.
Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange.
Wow.
2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation.
The launch abort system is
just over 3 minutes
very
into the flight of Artemis,
narrow cone at the top.
60 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated.
Wow. There, look at the camera. Wow.
Yeah.
And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange.
Absolutely incredible.
Well, for everybody who was doubting that it was going to happen, there you go.
No doubt.
You know,
we're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1.
It's a beauty.
Yeah.
So far, we've had a clean ascent.
Just
we saw those
amazing
solid
to
rocket
watch
boosters
that. I mean,
jettison
that's
about 2 minutes and 11 seconds.
You see some of the
after
Falcon
liftoff.
9
Shortly
SpaceX launches.
the
Those look puny compared to what just went off. I mean, that was massive.
Exactly. 1.1 million pounds of thrust versus this. This is 8.8. I mean, you know,
just
stunning.
I wish it was during the day so we could have seen the plume, but at night it was just as spectacular.
Now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good.
That's so cool. I guarantee you there's a whole lot of people that are breathing
Our core
easy,
stage main engine cutoff time is about 8 minutes
remember,
and 3 seconds.
this is
We are
still
now
not
5
the
minutes
number
and
one
11
priority of this
seconds
entire
into
mission.
flight,
The number one priority is the heat shield.
Yeah.
And we don't get to test that until the very end.
Yeah, that will be in December 11th. I mean, when it comes back. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing that makes this, you know, most of these launches, you're like, oh, it's in orbit, the satellite's deployed. This is just the beginning. This is going to be such a long mission. There's so many things that could go wrong between now and the end of the mission. So that's what I think is cool about this this mission is every day, I think, as a school kid, you could get up and like, what happened today? You know, what process is going on with the mission now? So there'll be something new and cool that happens every single day throughout the next 26 days.
People will be able to track it, and you know, this is going to be something that we talk about for a long time. You know, for some people this will be the do you remember where you were moment.
Yeah.
For other people it's just kind of a, you know, another oh gosh, wonder what's going to happen after this, and then it's just going to do nothing but start to get more incredible afterwards. Of course, the next mission expected to be manned, and it's Artemis 3 that we're expecting humans back on the moon, including the first person of color and the first woman. Artemis 4, we build out Gateway, and Artemis 5, we keep on rolling. So it's all in the plans, it's all in the work. It's just taking some time.
Yeah, this is the step. I mean, like you said, I mean, for people that don't understand how monumental this was tonight, mission 3, 4, and 5, they'll probably figure it out. You're going to look back on tonight and go, this is where it all started. This was the mission that set it all, on its current course, because this, we're going to the moon. We're going to have a base there. This is going to be a stepping stone to Mars. It really is one of those monumental moments. I think people, even if they don't understand, they're sound asleep right now, they'll wake up tomorrow morning and understand what a big deal this actually was for all of mankind, just not in the United States, because we've got a lot of international partners involved in this mission as well. And so this is going to be a huge something, a positive that we can all kind of rally around, because this is going to be great for all of mankind.
Yeah. So these main engines are going to burn for 8 minutes total, and then they cut off. And engine cut off. All 4 engines. There you go. Throttle down. Then we'll have SLS separation from the upper stage. And then that's where it's kind of like a little Russian doll. It starts to uncork a little bit.
Yeah.
So we get to see the ICPS, which is like another rocket that is the bottom of the white part that you see there at the top. That's the rocket that will take it out of Earth orbit and send it on its way to the moon.
Yeah, it's interesting to see such a large section of the rocket still intact here, because there's still so much thrust going on.
The flight dynamics officer reports that we have a nominal main engine cutoff.
So they're the main engines.
And we just heard the call for core stage separation. That means Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage are now flying free from the core stage of the Space Launch System. The next milestone will be solar array deploy approximately 18 minutes after liftoff. But before Orion stretches its wings, let's check back in with our friends at Kennedy Space Center and hear all about what it was like to hear the rocket roar off the launch pad.
Let's listen to this. I want to hear
all about it.
Yeah, I think for anybody who's gone through rocket launches down there, this had to be a unique experience, even for a seasoned rocket launch watcher down there.
There were a few journalists down there that I got to talk to who were there during shuttle and saw numerous shuttle launches, and they said it's just the ground shakes, and the shuttle was not nearly this incredible, and I just can't imagine. There's the turning basin there right in front of the media area, is the turning basin where they bring all the big pieces in of the rocket before they stack it in the VAB and whatnot, and they bring SpaceX through there and all kinds of stuff. I kept thinking to myself as I was down there looking at that, when the rocket goes up, all that water is going to be jumping because of the shaking. And I was like, my gosh, if there's if we get a gator coming up out of there, I'm going to be not paying attention. I'm going to be going down quickly.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I can't imagine the feel of that, because that's so much thrust. I mean, that you've basically experienced the most powerful rocket launch in the world. It's just... That's probably and I remember being down there for Ghost 16 and the feeling of the thrust from a smaller rocket. I can't imagine the size of this one, what it felt like. I mean, that's all you remember from a launch when you're down there is, it's beautiful, but the sound and that delayed sound, it's just like, it's crazy.
Yeah, so I can't wait to see the video from, and they'll be posting it pretty soon. Bandwidth out at the media site is like non-existent, so it's really hard to get video out. And so it'll take a little while for us to get to see what it was like there, to stand there and feel it. I'm sure there'll be video coming out of the firing room too, where Charlie Blackwell Thompson and the team were, because they'll obviously have felt it too. For those of you who kind of have a little bit of situational awareness with Kennedy Space Center, the firing room 1 is kind of an extension of the vehicle assembly building. And it's a very nondescript looking building from the back, but the front is this really cool angular window that with these pipes in it, and it's kind of a really cool looking architectural structure. And I didn't know where it was initially when I was down there and standing in the media area, and you kind of look around, you can see everything because the media area has a nice big hill. And then I looked over and I saw, you know, people getting in a car and driving out along this road that takes you out to the launch pad. And I was like, oh, I bet that's where the important people are. And then they have, meanwhile, behind you, this huge office building, this huge brand new office building. And if you remember, for the first launch attempt, Vice President Kamala Harris came down. And so we were down at the, on the lawn for the media area. We turned around and Kamala Harris and the whole group was up on a balcony overlooking everything and just kind of getting the lay of the land. So that was really interesting. Have all the dignitaries there and whatnot.
Hey guys, I was just pulling it up on the Ghost 16 satellite, and I could see the plume on the nighttime microphysics channel on the Ghost satellite. So I don't know if you guys can bring it up real quickly. It's a really cool image because the mesoscale sector was actually over Florida for tonight. And if you look off of the coast there, you'll see the plume. I mean, that tells you how big of a rocket that is, that it shows up so distinctly on the weather satellite imagery. You can actually see the plume and the fire coming out of the back of the rocket as it launches off from
wow.
From the Cape.
Yeah, you came right there in the middle.
So you see how, and I'm going back and forth with it, toggling back and forth, but
put your mouse up
so
where
right
it
there,
is, just so people,
look,
and
so
then toggle
everybody's
it.
seeing
So
right
cool.
there. I'll zoom in on it even more. So right there, that's the plume. I'm gonna zoom back in there, but I'll bring it back down here and I'll show you. I'm gonna go back and forth a couple times, but you see right there on the screen. I mean, that is. So that's the actual rocket launching. So this is the Ghost 16. This is a 30-second update. So you're getting the first couple minutes of the launch there. And if you look right after, you actually see the little trail that goes, and that's the plume left in the sky. So think about this during the day. It would have been really spectacular. But yeah, that's pretty incredible. I mean, that is cool. And, you know, just looking at that kind of shows you how big of a rocket that was. The fact that you could pick that up so easily on the satellite imagery, that's stunning. Yeah, I'm gonna have to save that for posterity. I mean, that's amazing. Really cool to see that.
Well, I can't wait to see what people who wake up tomorrow morning go, wow, it happened.
Yeah.
And I could go to work and say, I was watching, it was so great. So we know we're going to get an update here from Charlie Blackwell Toms that we're going to take that live for you, of course, because what a historic night for her, an incredible night for her.
Yeah.
And that entire room just probably electric at this point. They can finally get some sleep.
Yeah, that's just, it's just amazing. I mean, that's just, and you know, I mean, as much as we were, you know, fretting about all the delays, it's even worse for the people involved in this. And so it's got to feel like a mountain has been lifted off a lot of these people's backs that they were actually able to launch this
incredibly
tonight.
special. The first launch of Artemis. The first step in returning our country to the moon and on to Mars.
A little emotional there, to be expected.
What you have done today will inspire generations to come. So thank you. Thank you for your resilience. You know, I said at the pre-test briefing, the harder the climb, the better the view. We showed the Space Coast tonight. What a beautiful view it is. So congratulations.
What an amazing night.
So we got a couple of traditions here in launch control.
Oh, here we go.
And the first one is when you're in the position for the first time, you get a tie cutting. And so I have my launch director scissors. And I'm going to get my tie cut by a couple of legends that are here. And then anyone who wants their tie cut will be making the rounds in the firing room. You got your console chiefs. If they want to do it, that's fine. If you want me to do it, you might have to wait a little while, but I'll stay all night if I have to. It'll be my pleasure to cut ties. So I'm going to take care of mine, and then I have one other presentation that I want to make this evening.
So that will probably end up in a museum. Her tie, or at least part of her tie, will probably end up in a museum, maybe one of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museums.
Yeah, it's kind of cool that
or if
they're
not
they're letting this
NASA.
be seen of the public. This is something that would have happened behind the scenes for previous missions, but the public gets to see what a huge deal this was.
Yep. So then now she'll go around and start chopping ties. Who knows where this started?
Yeah, it's one of those things. If you're in the industry, they probably think, "God, this is normal." But people outside, like, what are they cutting ties for? That seems so odd. And I'm not cutting my tie because they got my good weather tie on tonight, so I can't cut mine.
Yeah, no, I promise I'm not going to cut your tie. Yeah, definitely don't want to do that. So, wow, that truly was just what an amazing sight to get to see, and thanks to everybody who's been hanging out with us here on the stream and watching as well. As you can imagine, there's more to come, not only from the Artemis rocket itself, but there's all kinds of stuff going on behind the scenes too. As soon as those solid rocket boosters fire, we mentioned that the rocket is going. And at that moment, Charlie Blackwell Thompson handed over to Flight Director Rick LeBrode in Houston. So now Houston has control. And it's Mission Control is now the one in charge.
With NASA's Sean Fuller about the start of this new era, which will pave the way for humans to go to the moon and eventually Mars.
There's a great buzz around here at the Johnson Space Center.
Because this rocket, now staged at Kennedy Space Center, is scheduled to launch Monday. And when it does, Mission Control here in Houston will manage the 42-day Artemis 1 mission.
We've done a lot of testing on the ground ahead of time. You test all the systems, but as an integrated vehicle, this is the first time to fly it.
Fly it roughly 40,000 miles to the far side of the moon and back, farther than any space vehicle has ever carried humans. Still just a stepping stone toward the final destination.
The moon is about 240,000 miles away, but it's significantly closer to Mars.
So the moon can be kind of a base camp.
We're really expanding the frontier of human exploration out to the moon, and then doing that scouting mission out to Mars too in the future, where we look to then eventually expand beyond that as well.
Like so many at NASA, Fuller hopes Artemis, like Apollo did, will ignite a curiosity about space.
We as a human species, we've always been exploring what's over the next hill, what's over the next mountain, what's west of the Mississippi River. All that exploration, we're just doing that now off of the Earth.
This is really exciting. They'll eventually
so
be swept back
we
against
are
the
waiting
vehicle
on the solar arrays to deploy, and we're
to
getting some
prevent any
pictures.
loads
These are
from
live
breaking
pictures
or
coming
damaging
off
the
now, not an
arrays.
animation.
And on the end of each solar array is a camera that will
This
capture
actually
images
is
for
coming
us
out of
throughout the mission, along
this
with a few
Orion
other
capsule,
cameras
the
placed
service
outside and
module
inside the
underneath it. There
spacecraft
they
to help us
go. See
monitor
the
and
solar
perform
arrays?
various other
And
inspections.
so these are going to stretch out a little bit. They've got the cameras to take a look at everything.
The Apollo capsule design, there were no solar arrays. We had fuel cells instead. So this design with arrays
cool
gives us the
I
opportunity
mean, that's an
to
important
stay
part
in
because
orbit
this is going to be
longer,
the
since we
power now for the
practically have
Orion
no
capsule.
limits
Those
to the
solar
energy
panels are
available
huge.
for use from the sun.
And that was part of that tape that got damaged in Nicole that was holding in, I think, the sensor that was supposed to help deploy these. So that was obviously wasn't damaged at all. That they're being deployed right now. That's a good sign.
Unfolding now. And again, Artemis 1 is a flight test. It's paving the way.
So after the wings deploy here, the solar arrays deploy, we have about a half-hour wait as they do some checks on all of this before we have a burn from the ICPS that would be kind of an elevation of the Orion capsule and the European Space Module, this whole upper stage. And then another burn takes place about a half hour after that, half hour, 40 minutes after that, which is the translunar injection. That's a big one. Yeah. That is the precision timed burn that will put the entire capsule on the proper path to go around the moon. And so that is like one of the high test moments.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you said the bandwidth down there's kind of bad. We're just starting to get some pictures and social media posts, and some of my friends that live in the Orlando area, it was spectacular from Orlando. It like looked like sunrise. It was lighting up the eastern sky. It was so bright. So people in Florida probably that didn't know what was going on, most of them probably did, but if they thought it wasn't going to happen tonight, I'm sure they woke up pretty quick when this was going off, because it looked spectacular from a long ways away down in Florida even.
Yeah, I mean, they were supposed to be able to see it clear up to South Carolina, even.
Yeah, almost the Savannah,
7 minutes
Charleston
after launch.
area. Yeah, so it's we had some clouds down there, which wasn't probably the greatest, but man, the views from like Miami and Orlando and Tampa seem to be amazing.
Just so cool to see. So after we get the wings out, after we do this Perigee maneuver and then the translunar injection burn, then the ICPS separates from Orion, and Orion and the European Service Module are on their way to the moon. And you know, it's just clicking right now. Everything has gone perfectly, which is so fantastic for all of the folks who've been working so hard on all of this over the last 20 years, but really putting in intense work over the last 5 to 10 years to get all of this put together. Just incredible.
Yeah, so this little slingshot
by the way,
maneuver, is going to be huge to get it all the way to the moon. I mean, because it's got to get in that orbital shot. It's got to get that little boost to get all the way to the moon right now, and then it's going to do that orbit around the moon and then come back. So there's a lot. I mean, this is an important part that's going to happen tonight, because these are the things that, once we have humans on board, are going to be crucial to get them there. So the launch, is like we said earlier on, we've been sweating the launch for 2 months, it feels like, but now, if all these things that could go wrong in the mission now to the moon and on the way back, and one of those things is the heat shields, as you mentioned, probably one of the most important things of the mission, which we won't know about to the very, very end. And so when you think about all the things we've been sweating with the launch and the orbit around the moon, and now, the thing that we're going to worry about for the next 26 days is that heat shield going to hold up when they come back?
Yeah, it's an incredibly important, yet astonishingly thin, very important membrane. And actually, we have a little bit more information about that for everybody, I believe.
February 1st, 2003. Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated on re-entry, killing 7 astronauts. An investigation pointed to failure of Columbia's heat shield, damaged during launch. It's a disaster still on the minds of many as NASA begins a new generation of human spaceflight, going farther and overcoming new challenges.
When you come back in from a distant place like the moon as opposed to the space shuttle, you're going much faster, and when you do your re-entry, it's a lot hotter and faster, right? So that translates into a lot of heat on the heat shield.
The heat shield's Apollo-like design deflects the heat of re-entry, while 180 blocks of an outer material called avcoat erodes as it heats up in order to carry the heat away. Measuring 16.5 feet wide, it's the largest heat shield of its kind, though only 1.6 inches at its thickest.
You come in, it's about 5,000 degrees at the bottom of the heat shield, 25,000 miles an hour barreling through the atmosphere. And on a crewed mission, the crew's only going to be about 3 or 4 feet away from that.
3 or 4 feet from 5,000 degrees. And the difference between life and death? A 1.6-inch membrane that is eroding away.
The only way you can test it is to get it out there and let it come in at 32 Mach.
Did you say 32 Mach?
So we have a long way to go. I mean, you have to remember, Brad, this thing is coming from the other side of the moon. First of all, this is expected to go farther than any human capable spacecraft has before. As a matter of fact, the calculations were done today, and they expect the Orion capsule to go 268,553 miles from Earth.
Yeah.
And when it does its slingshotting around the moon, it'll be about 80 miles above the moon's surface. So we're going to get some really incredible pictures of the moon's surface at the same time. But, you know, to get it out to the moon, and they're going to put it into what's called a retrograde orbit. So it's going to be going the opposite direction of the moon, which is a little bit tricky. But that's actually the orbit that they're really hoping to kind of get established in for some time. And then to get out there, once they're going to use the moon's gravitational pull, which is not nearly as much as Earth, but then that will kind of slingshot them into this orbital retrograde, the retrograde orbit. Then they'll fire that smaller engine that's on the European service module again, and that will then do another burn that will then slingshot Orion back around and get it sending back to Earth. So it's like one after the other of just things that really seem like science fiction. And yet here we are looking at live pictures of this capsule and this, upper stage of this rocket in space right now and how this is going to work. So you can see how kind of crazy their path is there with all these loop-de-loops that they get to do and how that goes. But it is just, we have some, this could be, that may be a correction burn. We'll have to see. The whole time they can fire off small engines on the sides to kind of get things lined up the way they want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, these are the calculations that are important because all these small burns that are happening now, because they want to be very efficient. We were mentioning earlier about the smaller satellites and how these small little boosters in space, if you start going in one direction, you're going to go at that speed forever until something slows you down. So small little burns have big impacts on the trajectory of a spacecraft.
Yep. And just like we saw earlier with this Cubesat group, the Team Miles, they're using a credit card sized electric plasma thruster to move this little Cubesat through space, and that's all it takes is to be able to do that. We can't really fathom that here on Earth unless you're a rocket scientist, and then of course you plan everything. But
now it makes me wish I had a good telescope so I could kind of see if I could take a look at this when it's going around the moon, which would be incredibly difficult to track. You'd have to have some tracking, some good tracking.
You'd have
software.
to have a really, really good telescope, Brad.
it would be tough, but that's like a dream shot to get this thing passing, near the moon would be amazing. But I think that's the great thing about, I think the cool thing about doing stuff like this about space and launching and going to the moon is, it's like we said earlier, I think any kid who could get it inspired to go out and just look up at the sky and start asking questions about, the moon or stars or planets. I mean, that's one of the other hidden things about these space missions when we talk about all the ancillary spin-offs and all the science and technology. It's the inspiration to young kids to get interested in science. Like say, ask your parents, ask them questions. Sometimes when the space station flies over, it's just something simple like that can get a kid inspired to go, I want to know more. Like, how is the space station up there? How does it get there? How does it stay in orbit? These are questions you want your kids asking you and inspire them to get involved in science because those are the things that make science so amazing because it's something you can touch and feel and kind of get involved in. And I think this mission, of all the space missions we've had recently, is going to be one that's going to inspire a whole generation of kids because they're going to want to get involved in whether it's the space race again to the moon. I don't think it's really a space race, but just the technological advances that are going to be happening over the next several years as this mission continues.
Well, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be rocket scientists either. I mean, science period is so incredible. So what we have not told people who are watching the stream right now and in the future is that Brad Panovich and I went to high school together in Copley, and we had a physics teacher who was incredibly engaged with space and getting kids hands-on experience. And Stout, was that her name?
Yeah.
Miss Stout?
Stout, yep.
Yeah.
We built a moon base on our high school property.
That's where I was
and I spent a week in that
this.
thing.
That's where I was going with this.
It's crazy.
So not only did we have moon base Copley, but before that, didn't we do like they put a camper in the front parking lot?
Yeah, we started
and they
small.
had all these cameras and stuff in it. And some kids got in there, and it was like a kind of a demo shuttle launch, and then that went so well. We had national TV coverage from it. I remember NBC coming and some of the other networks, and then a couple years later, we had Moonbase all of a sudden built in like the backyard of the school. Literally, it was a movie with a fish tank and tilapia fish that these kids were supposed to be responsible for.
Let me tell you, it was a great science experiment, but also like a societal experiment to live with a bunch of kids in a simulated moon base for a weekend. And
Lord of the Flies all over again.
It was crazy. We had geodesic domes, but you're right. I remember the tilapia. We grew lettuce on the top, and we did hydroponic growing of them. And the tilapia, the waste from the fish fed the lettuce, and then we used the fish and the lettuce to make some of the food. We actually had pizza, I think, with tilapia on it. So, and everyone had different roles. You know, there were communication officers, there was government officers. You had the hydroponics crew. You had the simulated spacewalk. So. And it just goes to show you something as simple as that. And that was one of the coolest things I ever did in high school, was to be a part of that. And it really did inspire me. I love that. I remember we had ham radio. I got my ham radio license through that and was able to talk to people on one of the shuttle missions. I remember via ham radio, which is one of the things I got to do in that. So it was a really
That's
cool
right. You
experience.
guys actually got to talk to people who were in space.
Yeah. So that was a really cool thing. And it's like, I think I found a link to a YouTube channel somewhere where they did a story on it, and I went back and looked at it, and I'm like, I cannot believe we did that. It was such a cool thing.
You know, somebody has VHS tape of that somewhere in their basement.
Yeah,
and it's just a matter of time until it comes out.
It needs to be digitized.
What was your role in it?
I was a government officer, believe it or not. So my job was
I of course believe that.
Was to come up with the governance and like how we would run everything in there. So it was. Which was the interesting part, because once you got in there, it was like, oh my gosh, everything went crazy. So to have control of all these kids doing their thing, and it was a great learning experience. It really was. But
how many people were in there? I can't remember.
I want to say 60 or 80. There was a good chunk. I
thought it was like 80. Yeah.
And we had shifts, and the other thing is we had a whole bunch of kids that were mission control that stayed in the auditorium and were our mission control, and so everybody had a role. And it was a year-long process, because you had to be trained, and I went through first aid training, and we did simulated moonwalks at the bottom of the pool. I remember putting scuba gear on and having weights and walking on magnetic plates on the bottom of the pool floor to simulate a spacewalk. It was pretty cool. It really was. We went to a cool high school.
And yet I didn't get to partake.
Yes.
I didn't qualify.
Oh man, it was awesome. Yeah,
Shocker.
that was a great event though. I do think about that all the time, though, and I think that's the thing that inspired me to love space. But I think as meteorologists, too, you always just like looking up. I think there's something about just looking at the sky, and if it's not our weather, it's what's going on beyond our weather, beyond the troposphere, that kind of draws your eye to it. So,
right, and meteorology is a science of sciences, and meteorology obviously played a pretty big role in tonight's launch, too, because during the polling, we heard space weather, launch weather.
Weren't you a little nervous you were going to get like, launch. Oh, there's a cloud rule, cumulus cloud rule or something.
Of course, it's got to be the weather.
Blame it on the meteorologist,
right? Always. We're always the ones to blame.
Yeah, before we leave you guys tonight, we do have one more package we want to show you. I know because, this whole mission is about getting back to the moon. And once we get to the moon, we're going to have a new rover. We're going to have a new moon base. And so that rover testing is actually happening on Earth, believe it or not. And you have to find unique terrain to test this, obviously. So where do you find a terrain that's like the moon? Well, you go to Arizona, and that's where we find the rover testing.
Welcome to the surface of the moon, or at least the closest thing we have to it here on Earth, which is just a little bit north of Flagstaff. For the past 2 weeks, NASA has been testing the gear that will take us back to the moon and maybe even farther.
Eventually, a rover just like this one
will drive on the moon.
All the wheels are independently controlled, and they also have active suspension so they can raise and lower when needed.
This one is a test bed. The wheels move independently. It can spin on a dime, climb rocks up to a foot tall. It's gone through a lot of changes, testing things out to see what works best in space.
So for this test series, we were looking at kind of different driving systems, like with windows or cameras. People spent 2 nights in the rover and 3 days traversing all over the lava flow, doing actual geological science, conversing with mission control back in Houston, and really kind of simulating a lunar surface mission.
He's not kidding. The rover has a toilet. There's a spacesuit attached to the back of it.
Do you want to hop up here and drive?
I absolutely want to drive. Are you kidding? Just push straight forward.
Yeah. You can't go wrong.
The rover has cameras that show you exactly how close you are to a rock, and it's very easy to drive, which was the point. It's meant to be intuitive.
Why don't all cars drive with a joystick? This is so much easier. You should see Lucian parallel park this thing. It's a dream.
It even drives sideways.
And do a pure twist. Yep, and just stay committed to that command.
The Desert Rats, it stands for Research and Technology Studies, are doing mock space missions to test out the new equipment that'll eventually blast off.
One of the things we learned with the lighting just over the head is that at times it wasn't enough lighting.
But it's basically an article that allows us to not have to bring like a whole pressurized spacesuit out here, but it's got all the comm capability, the lighting, the cameras.
They're even studying how to put a cell phone on the moon. They're trying to see how 4G cellular technology works on terrain like the moon and Mars.
What's the point of going if you're not going to send cool pictures back and cool data, science info?
The moon missions are called Artemis, and they're getting closer. They start with unmanned test missions to make sure it all works, building up for landing on the moon, hopefully in 2025. And that mission starts in the Arizona desert. William Pitts, 12 News.
Yeah, and that's, the next step is to be on the surface of the moon and building a base and having a rover, which would be really cool. And I think when that happens, that's when I think people will look back on tonight and go, what a big deal tonight was, because we wouldn't be there unless tonight happened.
Yeah, but can it parallel park? Let's face it. That's the real thing hitting humanity right now. Can it parallel
And I kind
park?
of feel like putting a cell phone on the moon might ruin it, so I don't know if we should do that.
Exactly. Yeah, preserve it for all. I mean, we got to have our selfies, though. That's how we roll these days, most certainly.
Yeah.
Well, Brad, this has been so fun to get to chat with you about this. I know we've talked about it a number of times. And, I don't know if you're coming home for Christmas, but hopefully we'll be able to get together for lunch or coffee or something.
Yeah, absolutely. When I get back home to the snow. But it's been great tonight. And I think this is, I hope people will look back on this and understand it's a big deal. I think it's, it's hard for people that aren't into this kind of stuff to understand it, and it may not hit them till later, but it was really cool to see it tonight. And I could tell it was fun listening to the NASA feed, because you listen to that so often over the last 2 months, and it's like, we're gonna the tone of their voices when you knew this was going to happen, the way it changed, you knew how excited they were and what a big deal it was. And I think that said everything I had to hear. When I heard the tone of voice change completely, you're like, oh, it got me excited, because I'm like, that's not the way they normally talk. They're getting excited.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it was definitely something to behold, and I'll remember where I was at this moment, and getting to spend it with everybody who watched the stream tonight. We appreciate it so much.
Yeah, so thanks to everybody out there who tuned in, whether you're on YouTube, WCNC Plus, Tegna channels all across the country. We were streaming on Roku and Amazon. We appreciate you tuning in tonight, and remember, this is just the beginning of this mission. There's a whole nother 25 days and a half or so to go of this mission, and it's the beginning of a long process to get to the moon and Mars. So hopefully tonight is just something that'll spark your interest and maybe look more into it and get excited for the next mission, because there will be more that to come in the future. So thanks for tuning in tonight, and I hope you have a great night. Sleep in this morning, drink some coffee. I got to get up and do a presentation, save my voice, because I'll run on adrenaline tomorrow, Betsy. Getting excited for this, so it'll be fun to talk about.
That's pretty much what everybody's going to be doing, most certainly. Well, thanks so much, Brad. Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.
I've always been excited about manned spaceflight. I worked on the space shuttle before I came to the Orion program, and You know, it's that pushing the boundaries. It's going further than we've gone before.
As a little kid, I grew up watching space stuff, and I couldn't get enough of NASA, right? And then to see the hardware come together and see spaceships being built and flown, it's amazing. And the little kid in me gets excited still.
To be a part of it and know that there are crew on board, and when they come back safely, to know that you are part of that is very rewarding.
The favorite part is the history that has come before us and the history that has still yet to be written. We are in the middle of it.
It still shocks me sometimes to think that I'm going to be sitting in the Mission Control Center. It's like one of those childhood dreams that I wasn't sure that would ever come true. I don't know that it was even a dream that I knew that I had. Right? It was just kind of this really cool thing that I got a chance to do.
I have worked the Orion program since the inception, and so this is an opportunity to go from a clean sheet of paper to actually rolling out of the VAB with the real thing.
Some people work their whole career, on this vehicle thus far, and to see it fly is going to be really tremendous for them. So we're super excited.
On the day of launch, it'll be time for folks like myself to sit back and watch, because we'll be turning it over to the mission management team. They'll be the one that are literally pushing the button and making it go. And from there, it's going to be just a spectacular moment.
There's a lot of pride, everybody working this team, and I'm so proud of them, and that they'll be so excited to get to this point.
I am confident somewhere along that mission that I'm going to feel a lot of happiness for this great team. Just a wonderful team to work with.
I think people are, somewhat tired because we've done so much work to get here, but the excitement level is amazing.
Before Crew 4 returns home. Jessica, can you tell me about one of the experiments that will help return us to the moon with the Artemis program?
We do a lot of experiments where we are looking into developing new technologies that will enable further into the solar system. And one of those technologies was the AstroRad experiment. Radiation is one of the challenges that we face when we think about going further into the solar system. And so this vest is an option for providing the crew member with protection. And then one of the mannequins on Artemis 1, launching here later this month, will also be wearing the vest. We'll get a sense for its effectiveness on board as well.
Samantha, I know that you've been doing a lot of work to test how we would grow crops in space. What crops are you growing on Space Station right now, and what's unique about them?
Indeed. Actually, right next to us as we are talking to you, we have a little space station vegetable garden. It's called X-Root, and in a few weeks it will be full of fully grown, hopefully, tomatoes and carrot plants. I don't have much of a green thumb, I must confess, but when I harvested those plants and I could really breathe in all that smell, even if there is no soil, it still has that smell that you would associate on the ground with walking, through a vegetable garden after a rainy day, when there is that moisture in the air, and that was just so pleasant after such a long time living away from any kind of natural environment. It was very, very pleasant for me.
If it makes you feel any better, I also do not have a green thumb. So what about water? How are you testing critical life support systems like water to hopefully help us stay off Earth longer than we ever have before?
Sure, yes. So we kind of use the tagline that yesterday's coffee becomes today's coffee. So there's a process by which we can filter our urine, and so we are at the point now where we are able to recycle about 96% of the essentially of our water on board, and are continuing to test new technologies to get even closer to the 98% utilization rate that we'll need for the moon in particular.
Samantha, what are you most excited about for Artemis 1?
Seeing that gigantic rocket take off, and I think it will be just a sign of all those great things to come.
Jessica, you could one day walk on the moon as part of the Artemis program. How does that make you feel?
The idea of being able to explore the surface of another planetary body, especially for me as a geologist and a planetary geologist specifically, is just super exciting. All of the science that we're going to be able to conduct from the surface of the moon.
Jessica, Samantha, thank you so much. And before you go, I'd love to see a flip. Laugh. I love it. And a double backflip at that. Now, Kayla, you, of course, lived and worked on the International Space Station as part of Crew 3. Do you enjoy, or did you enjoy doing all those science experiments while you were there? It's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, it's incredible to be a part of every single experiment. It's an honor to play a small role in it. We got to do some really cool tech demonstrations while we were up there too. So for me as an engineer, that was really fun. That's a photo of me doing the first scanning electron microscope samples on the International Space Station. And it was cool for me because I worked with a scanning electron microscope in my graduate school research that took up it was as big as this desk.
Oh.
But seeing a miniaturized version of those that we have up there, and imagining how we could use it in a lunar or Martian laboratory to better analyze samples and decide what to bring home was really exciting.
Yeah, and you touched on this earlier before, but I do think it's just so important to note again that you're doing science for scientists who've been working on their studies for decades, some of them. So to fulfill that, how does that make you feel?
It's incredible. We're almost like their laboratory technicians for that little moment in time, but they've been working their entire life, sometimes decades, years, to get that science payload up there. And it's a really unique laboratory environment. The microgravity environment, the space environment, the radiation environment, like you heard talked about in those videos, provides an opportunity to do science that we just can't do here on Earth.
Yeah, and to think that what we do on the International Space Station can fuel future Artemis missions, I think the fact that they go hand in hand is really cool. All right, so let's take some more social media questions. Social media is buzzing right now since we launched about 48 minutes ago. So why don't we take the first question, I think again from let's see, Kayla, how do you feel after launch?
Super inspired. I mean, we talked about it earlier with the Red Crew and in the moments just after launch, but this is really the culmination of a giant team effort. It takes every single member of our team to pull off a successful launch. It's incredibly complicated, incredibly challenging, and in some cases kind of dangerous for a Red Crew team who went inside the blast danger area to make a fix that was critical to today's launch. And so to see the team succeed and feel that excitement was incredible.
I really still have Charlie Blackwell Thompson's words ringing in my head. The fact that she said the harder the climb, the better the view.
Absolutely.
100% correct. All right, next question is from actor Jack Black. He starred in a movie called Apollo 10.5. He has a question for Kayla.
Okay, Jack's final question, I promise. Let's talk about Orion. How long will it take for Orion to fly around the moon and come home? And what's that re-entry going to be like? Sounds like it might be a little hot. Coming in hot.
You're exactly right, Jack. It is a 26-day mission that we have planned for Artemis, where it will go to the moon, go into a distant retrograde orbit, so we'll get a few close flybys and then some time in deep space past the moon. And then, yeah, that re-entry is going to be something else. It's going to be 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, super hot. And so we'll be looking at how the heat shield performs just to ensure that it'll be able to protect the crew for that speed and temperature.
That's half as hot as the sun.
Yes, it's incredibly hot, so we rely on that heat shield to keep our systems and our crew safe, but we expect that it'll perform well, but we're excited to see how it does in about 26 days.
Okay. One last question from social media. What qualifications are required to become an astronaut?
You have to study STEM. You have to have a master's degree or higher in a STEM field. But besides that, we're looking for people who are awesome team players. So there's a lot of different roads to become an astronaut.
We seem to be getting a lot of questions about how people themselves can become astronauts. I think that's really cool that we might see and inspire, again, people who might think about becoming astronauts.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you, Kayla, and thank you for those who sent in those questions. We are about 50 minutes after the launch of Artemis 1, and we are approaching the next critical milestone. That's Perigee raise maneuver. So let's head back over to Leah in Mission Control.
Thanks, Megan. And you're right, we are coming up on Perigee raise maneuver about 2 minutes from now. We are now 51 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1 after lifting off at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time from Kennedy Space Center. The vehicle now traveling over 14,600 miles per hour. So during Orion's orbit of Earth, it reaches an apogee and a perigee. The apogee is the highest point above Earth's surface and the perigee is the lowest. Therefore, this Perigee raise maneuver is a firing of the ICPS RL-10 engine, and it's going to raise the lowest point of Orion's orbit over Earth. This also included a checkout of Orion's systems and any adjustments to the solar arrays. All 4 of those solar arrays, as you can see, are swept back. That's going to keep them from having any loads imparted that might damage them for use later in the mission. This also, the Perigee raise maneuver, will put us in the proper position for the translunar injection burn. That's that really big and long burn that we need to send us to the moon. We're about 1 minute away from the Perigee raise maneuver. This is a shorter burn. It's less than 30 seconds. About 45 seconds until the Perigee raise maneuver. Coming up on 53 minutes into today's mission, and we are standing by for the start of the Perigee raise maneuver. Again, this is a firing of the RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. It's less than 30 seconds long. And we have confirmation of Perigee raise maneuver ignition and full thrust. This is a live view from the spacecraft. Again, a really short burn. We're standing by for the cutoff. And we have confirmation of Perigee raise maneuver cutoff. Flight Dynamics Officer reporting on the loops here in Mission Control Houston that it was a good burn. We are now 54 minutes into the flight, Orion traveling 14,700 miles per hour, and that was the Perigee raise maneuver, lifting the lowest part of Orion's orbit around the Earth and putting us right where we want to be for the translunar injection burn. We're looking for that translunar injection burn to happen about 1 hour and 26 minutes after launch, so about 30 minutes from now. That'll be that long burn that helps us break free from the pull of Earth's gravity and commits the spacecraft to a lunar trajectory. So with successful completion of the Perigee raise maneuver, I'm going to toss it back to Megan at KSC.
No, keep it.
I hope you didn't miss it, but if you did, we have a quick replay of the launch here.
pounds of pressure water now flowing under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiate. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through.
Now to celebrate Artemis 1's successful liftoff is NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. Administrator, you got to share what you just told Kayla and I. You said that that was the biggest flame you've ever seen.
That's the biggest flame I've ever seen. It's the most acoustical shock wave that I had ever experienced. We were out on the roof of the Launch Control Center, and I'm telling you, you definitely knew that there was some energy being expended over there.
So what does it mean to you to be the leader of our organization for a historic launch like this? We've been talking about the team it takes to get this done. How does it feel to be at the helm of that ship?
Well, I got to talk to the Launch Control Center team, and I said to them, you all are a part of a great legacy that has been many, many years coming, a lot of sweat and tears, and this legacy is now taking us as we explore the heavens. And it didn't end with Apollo 17, but this time we're going back and we're going to learn a lot of what we have to, and then we're going to Mars with humans.
Why is it such a priority for the agency to land the first woman and first person of color on the moon through this Artemis program?
Well, I think it's reflective of us. It's reflective of America. We are people, our Latin emblem is E pluribus unum. In the chamber of the United States Senate, over that main door is E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And so our astronaut corps reflects that. And it's going to be the first boots back on the moon are going to be the first woman and the next man.
Yeah. And another goal of the Artemis program is to spur economic development. Can you talk to us about how this program has been able to do that for the country?
Well, if you put it in NASA's economic report terms, it's billions of dollars affecting the economy, almost 400,000 jobs. But that's just direct. Think of all the indirect expenditures that are causing the economy to rise and more jobs. For example, what you guys are doing on the station, a lot of your research. Take, for example, the pharmaceutical research. You're helping already one drug that's being manufactured on Earth better because of what you learned in space, and that drug is attacking cancer. Now, what's the value of that? That's just additional value that is added. I remind everybody, in everybody's pocket, they've got a cell phone, and that's got a camera, and that's a camera on a chip that came out of the NASA space program.
That's right.
Absolutely. In addition to those innovative new technologies and the economic impact, I think for me, seeing this launch today, it's so palpable, just that human desire to explore. What do you think about what we're doing to inspire the Artemis and the generations to follow us?
Well, I think all you have to do is walk into a classroom of kids and look how their eyes get big when you start talking about space. And that is going to multiply itself manyfold as we go back to the moon and then on to Mars. It's also going to bring about a new generation of engineers and mathematicians and technologists and scientists, and all the benefits of that additional activity and education coming out of the Artemis generation. Look what that's going to do for our country and our economy, as well as for our international partners. And it's a great day.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Administrator, thank you so much for joining us for this momentous occasion. As you said, this is the beginning of a new age in space exploration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
And Kayla, that's going to do it for us here at the host desk. Launch was just the first step in a nearly 26-day mission. Our colleagues in Houston will now continue the broadcast to bring you the next big milestone to the moon. From Kayla and me, have a great day, and go Artemis 1.
Go Artemis.
And we had a great ride to orbit today. We are now 1 hour and 2 minutes since we launched the Artemis 1 mission. Orion is traveling with the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, now almost 15,000 miles per hour. We recently saw the Perigee raise maneuver. That's where we lifted the lowest point of Orion's orbit around the Earth, and it puts us in the perfect position to prepare us for translunar injection burn coming up in about 25 minutes. So again, we are looking forward to that translunar injection burn. That's what it's going to commit us to our journey to the moon. And to tell us a little bit more about the translunar injection burn, we've got Dan Hewitt standing by to show us on the moon board how it's all going to go down.
Hey, thanks, Leah. Everybody, welcome back to the moon board. So translunar injection, this is the big one. Just a refresher, we're going to be using this, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. This is what's taken over for all of our in-space propulsion maneuvers after that core stage and those boosters have since dropped away. Modified upper stage from the Delta IV family of rockets from United Launch Alliance. Hydrogen, oxygen, fueling the RL-10B-2 engine produces about 24,000 pounds of thrust in a vacuum. Now, the translunar injection is what's going to give us the energy to go from low Earth orbit all the way out here. Now, what does that mean? Here comes a really overly simplified orbital mechanics lesson. Let's say you're in orbit around a planet, say Earth, and you're in a nice circular orbit, but you want to have that orbit be even higher. Well, what you can do is fire your engine behind you, increase your speed, and that then increases the corresponding apogee, or the highest point of your orbit, on the other side, and that's how you raise it up. Well, if you wanted to make it into a nice circle, you could follow up and do another burn right here, and that would raise your perigee, or your lowest point, and then you're in a circular orbit around Earth. That's essentially called a Hohmann transfer. If you've ever followed our missions to the space station, that's what we're doing to kind of gradually raise our orbit until we get to the space station. But for this, we're talking about a lot more energy to get somewhere a lot farther away. So what we're essentially doing is we're going to be in this circular orbit around planet Earth, and we are going to be firing that engine with 24,000 pounds of thrust for about 18 minutes. And what that does is it doesn't just increase your apogee by a little, it increases it all the way out, and it's timed. So by the time Orion is hitting its apogee, the highest point of that orbit, the moon will have moved into position that you're entering into its sphere of influence. You're entering into that area where the lunar gravity is going to be able to capture you. And so that's why we're firing the engine for that long. We need to have that much thrust, that much time to get the energy to go out there. So that's the rough orbital mechanics of what we're doing. Now, after that TLI burn is done, the ICPS is going to separate. Its job largely done in the Artemis 1 mission. As we heard, it's got some secondary payloads up in this stage adapter here that it's going to deploy on its way out. The ICPS will have one more burn after TLI called a disposal burn. And what that's going to do is put it on a trajectory almost looking parallel to that of Orion, where it's going to go around the moon, slingshot away, and then go into what's called a heliocentric orbit. It's actually going to go into orbit around the sun, just like Earth. It's going to leave the Earth-Moon system completely. And then after that, all of the propulsion duties get handed over to the European Service Module. So it'll be using its engines. It's going to do the outbound trajectory correction burn, at least the first one on flight day 1, and a couple more until we get out to the moon and get ready to head into distant retrograde orbit. So that's TLI. It's coming up next. It's going to be a really big moment to pay attention to. So we'll send it back over to Leah to walk us through the ops. Leah.
Thanks, Dan. We are 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 15,200 miles per hour. Again, we've recently had the Perigee raise maneuver, and in less than 20 minutes now, we'll be looking for the Translunar injection burn that Dan just showcased that's going to send us to the moon. But our mission started off with an epic show from the Space Launch System. Again, the Space Launch System is what carried us into orbit today, launching off at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time. And we've got a couple of special guests from Marshall Space Flight Center. We have Bruce Tiller, the Solid Rocket Booster Manager, and Johnny Heflin, the RS-25 Engine Manager, to tell us more about the maiden voyage of the rocket. Now, they both got to watch it live at Kennedy Space Center. So a big hi to you, Bruce and Johnny. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes, pleasure to be here.
And can you tell me a little bit about SLS performance today? Did it perform as you expected?
Go ahead, Bruce.
You want me to start?
Go ahead.
Sure. So I managed the booster part of the rocket, and the boosters were fantastic. They performed just as we expected. We got to see some of the data. Obviously, the team hadn't plotted it all, but the pressures looked great. You know, it burned for just the right amount of time, and it separated great. We could see that as well. So very pleased. We were confident it would work well, and it did. Very happy.
Similar story for RS-25. Nominal, what we call nominal performance. The engines performed exactly as predicted based on the quick look data. Like the booster, we've got a lot of data to look at, but so far the data looks really, really good. These historic RS-25s that have 25 flights between them on coming off the shuttle program. So really looking forward to getting a look at the data. It looks really good so far.
That's fantastic, and we agree. It was amazing to monitor here, and the loops were very quiet in Mission Control Houston. That was a good sign. You knew that things were going well. So we know that the launch abort system was inactive for this mission, but it will be active for when we have crew on board for Artemis 2. Are there any other differences we can expect to see in the rocket for Artemis 2?
So for the boosters, by and large, no. If I talk about the boosters from top to bottom, we are going to make one change though, because of the crew is on it. We're going to have a delay timer in there so that if for some reason they need to abort, we have a few seconds there before, after they abort, before the termination system destroys the rocket. So we will add that, but other than that, nope, these boosters will be the same. Second flight is the first.
Same story for RS-25. It will be the next set of 4 heritage engines from the shuttle program. Configuration-wise, they'll be the same as what we flew today.
Then I'm glad it all went so well. And so after you get that data back from today, what's next for your team?
Well, for my team, we've still got a ton of work to do. We're not only I mean, we're working on at least 3 flight sets at the same time, and so we've got 2 and 3 and 4 to work on. We also are working on a new booster that's a composite case design that will replace this steel case version that we're flying today. So we're excited about that, and there's a lot of work going on there as well. So we've got a lot to do, and we'll just keep doing it.
So RS-25, super busy as well. We have the Artemis 2 engines have already been delivered to MAF, and they're on schedule to be installed in the Artemis 2 core stage in mid-January. We're also about to start the certification test series for the new RS-25 engines that we're building. We have heritage engines for the first 4 flights. Beyond that, coming in on Artemis 5, we will fly what we call the RS-25 restart engines that have been redesigned to reduce cost and reestablish manufacturing for future flights. So we're really excited to get into that certification test series really soon as well.
All right, well, thank you both so much again for joining us. I'm glad that you got to watch the launch, and a major congratulations to you and your teams for all of the effort that you've poured into this. Go Artemis.
Great day.
Great day.
Thank you so much.
All right, and we are now 1 hour and 12 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1. We are traveling at orbital velocity. Again, Orion is currently attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which recently performed the Perigee raise maneuver. And we are standing by for translunar injection burn, now less than 15 minutes away. It's going to be about an 18-minute burn that will commit us to the moon. Part of the Artemis program's goal is to inspire the next generation of dreamers and explorers. So we want to show you what students are doing right now to bring the Artemis missions to life.
NASA's Artemis mission will land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon.
And today's students are the Artemis generation.
If you're a student, you can design and build technologies that support the Artemis mission with NASA's Artemis Student Challenges.
No matter your background or experience,
you're invited to choose a challenge that interests you, whether it's
rockets,
robots,
tools,
software, vehicles,
or other technologies. There's an exciting challenge for you.
So find a mentor and build a team of students.
Review the rules and requirements, and bring your ideas
to life with NASA's Artemis Student Challenges.
Visit stem.nasa.gov/Artemis and see how you can join one of NASA's mission-related student challenges.
Again, 1 hour and 13 minutes, 30 seconds since liftoff today. We are looking towards translunar injection burn, now about 13 minutes away. That's going to send us to the moon. But did you know that you were invited to fly on the first Artemis mission too? Earlier this year, NASA asked the public to create a pass to virtually board Orion. Anyone who signed up got to include their name on a flash drive. I know my name is on there. And that flash drive is on Orion right now for its journey around the moon. It has more than 3.3 million names. The Orion spacecraft is designed to carry 4 crew members to lunar orbit, which we're preparing for on Artemis 2. NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik brought us through the hatch of the vehicle to show us where those future crew members will live and work during their journey.
This is the Orion crew station, where the crew will be when they fly the vehicle. As you can see, the commander seat's on the left, the pilot seat is on the right. Compared to the space shuttle, which had over 1,200 switches, controls, and circuit breakers, Artemis astronauts will have much less, only about 63. Inside, the crew of 4 can live and work for up to 21 days at a time, which is several days longer than the previous crewed Apollo missions to the moon. The interior is about 30% larger than those Apollo-era capsules to give more crew living and working space. Everything crew needs is packed right under the floor, thanks to the Orion stowage system. Under these panels is space for everything ranging from food, clothing, sleeping bags, to science and camera equipment, and even the tools necessary to perform repairs if required. On the upper part of the crew compartment, or what we call the overhead, is the docking compartment, a crucial component to future exploration. It allows crews to dock the Orion capsule to Gateway, NASA's next generation lunar outpost. Once they dock, crews will have the ability to board the lunar landers also attached to the Gateway and then head down to the surface of the moon. Through these windows, the 4 crew members will have amazing front row seats of their journey to and from the moon. Do you remember Apollo 8 and Bill Anders' famous photo of Earthrise as they came around the moon and saw it for the first time? Imagine being one of those first crew members on Orion, having their own modern-day Earthrise, and knowing they are traveling farther from Earth than humans have ever traveled before. Thanks to thousands of people from across the country and around the world who have helped with the research, design, construction, testing, and more testing. My fellow astronauts and I know that whoever gets selected for future Artemis missions, they're going to have the journey of a lifetime on board the spectacular vehicle we call Orion.
We're now coming up on 10 minutes until the translunar injection burn. Again, Orion is still attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. That RL-10 engine is what's going to perform the burn for us. But to hear more about Orion, I'm going to send it back to Dan at the moon board to tell us all about our spacecraft.
Hey, thanks, Leah. Welcome back to the moon board and Orion. So it's still attached to ICPS, still flying on the very upper part of SLS, but pretty soon it's going to be flying free. And after that happens, it's going to take over all of the propulsion, all of the flying, everything for the rest of the mission. And so to talk a little bit more about propulsion, let's focus in on this, the European Service Module. So this is what's going to be doing all of our maneuvers after we're done with ICPS and the translunar injection burn. And it's going to be doing that with a mix of 3 different types of engines. First one here on the bottom is the large orbital maneuvering system engine. This one produces about 6,000 pounds of thrust. That's going to be doing a lot of your really major pushing maneuvers when we get into the powered flybys, the insertion into distant retrograde orbit, the burns to start sending us back home. That's the one that's really applying the most force. It can also gimbal, which essentially means it can swivel around, and that can help your steering. It's helped out by these 8 auxiliary thrusters. They're in pairs. Those are a little bit smaller. Each one of those produces about 105 pounds of thrust each, but they add some additional push to that orbital maneuvering system engine. And then we also have 24 reaction control system thrusters, these smaller ones that you can see all around Orion. Those are used for a lot of attitude control, so again, which they can help which way you're pointing, but also small translational maneuvers, so moving side to side, up, down, those can be called into play. Now, all of those engines share a common fuel source. They're using what are called hypergolic fuels, a mix of a fuel and an oxidizer, in this case monomethylhydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide. Now, those are long names, and they're hypergolic fuels. What does that mean? A hypergolic fuel essentially means you take your fuel and your oxidizer, you put them together, you get a reaction. You get an exothermic reaction, which creates that thrust, which comes out. You don't need an ignition source like we have on SLS, which is using oxygen and hydrogen. They're extremely reliable. They're very stable. You don't have to store them at cryogenic temperatures, which is really necessary for smaller spacecraft in orbit because it takes a tremendous amount of electrical energy just to keep fuels that cold. And so we can store them at a much closer to room temperature, essentially, when they're on board this spacecraft. So that's all of the primary propulsion that's going to take over. And again, that's going to be after we get through translunar injection. We're going to be doing correction burns on the way out, a number around the moon as we hang out in distant retrograde orbit for about a week, and then eventually sending us on the way back home. But still attached to ICPS right now, going to detach shortly after that burn is complete, and then Orion will be flying free, the service module pushing it for the rest of the way. So with that, I'll send it back over to Leah as we get closer to that TLI burn.
Thank you, Dan. And yes, indeed, we are looking for TLI coming up in about 7 minutes from now. Again, that's it's a long burn for us, about 18 minutes long. But before we get to that milestone, I have a friend of mine here. It's Stu McClung, the Program Planning and Control Office Chief of Staff for the Orion program. Stu, I am so glad that you could join us today.
Thank you. Good morning. Good to be here.
So how is the spacecraft performing so far, and what's next?
So far so well. Good. We were clean during the pre-launch and Ascent. So the team's down the hall in the MUR taking a look, working everything. It looks good so far, so that's good. Of course, we got the burn coming. After the burn, we'll start ticking through all of our planned events. Like we have a the SAW modal survey. The wings will have a modal survey that we'll do later this morning. One of the first DTOs that we'll take a look at and evaluate how they react.
So DTO, designated test objective. What's another one of those that we'll be looking at over the next 26 days?
We have probably a good 100 of them. They, culminate from everything from like the modal survey to how the cooling system behaves, common track system. On entry day, one of our major test objectives is looking at how the heat shield and how it handles entry heating.
So how does it feel to be here today and see the future of human space exploration unfold?
It's great. I was doing my shift in the MUR earlier today. Haven't slept. The emotion and the adrenaline's got me going. It's great to be a part of this. It's great watching watching the KSC team execute, and now this is day one for us. We've got 26 days for our team to execute now, and we'll go do our job and set the stage for future Artemis exploration.
And we're excited. We're going to be here along the way for all those major milestones, burns, all the other exciting events that we are looking forward to. So thank you so much for joining us here. We are really excited. A big congrats to you and your team.
Thanks. Let's go have a good burn and let's go to the moon.
Let's do it. We are now less than 5 minutes away from the Translunar injection burn. Again, this is the burn that's going to send us around the moon, going to commit us to a lunar trajectory. It is approximately an 18-minute burn. It's a firing of that RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. You've got a view here of the White Flight Control Room in Mission Control Houston. This is where all of the teams will be monitoring the mission over the next 26 days. Teams monitored launch tonight. There are, of course, several different shifts that'll be working here. All right, we are coming up now on about 3 minutes until the Translunar injection burn. Again, this is about an 18-minute long burn. A firing of the RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage commits us to lunar trajectory. It helps us break free from the gravitational pull of Earth. In case you missed it, in June of this year, we launched Capstone, a small satellite launched from New Zealand designed to test a unique lunar orbit for our future space station around the moon called Gateway. And just 2 days ago, Capstone arrived at its intended orbit around the moon. So we're very excited for that milestone. It really helps pave the way for our future Artemis missions. We are now 1 hour 20, coming up on 25 minutes since liftoff from Kennedy Space Center today at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time. We had a really smooth ride to orbit. We saw solid rocket booster jettison, as well as launch abort system jettison. Eventually, we had core stage separation, which put us in the configuration that we have now, with Orion connected to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage and flying free. The solar arrays deployed and have been swept back in preparation for the translunar injection burn. Earlier, we had the Perigee raise maneuver, which lifted the lowest part of Orion's orbit around the Earth, put us in this perfect positioning ahead of translunar injection burn. A good shot here of our two flight controllers. On the left, you saw Judd Freeling. He is the Ascent flight controller. He's been with his team here for the last several hours. And to his right is Rick LeBrode. He's the lead flight controller for a majority of the rest of the mission. Judd's team will take over again once we get back into the re-entry portion. We're now less than a minute away from translunar injection burn. And this is a live view from the spacecraft. You can see from this view we have all four of those solar array wings swept back. Orion now traveling off the northwest coast of Australia towards the Pacific Ocean. This translunar injection burn will begin to take it away from the Earth, breaking it free from the pull of gravity. We're standing by for confirmation that the burn has started. We have confirmation from the booster officer that the translunar injection burn has begun and that we are at maximum thrust. Again, this is a long burn, about 18 minutes. It commits us to a lunar trajectory. This ICPS firing now is an RL-10 engine. It's a design that's been around since the 1960s, and it's a proven, reliable engine. This single engine has 25,000 pounds of thrust. We've already seen the ICPS in action today as it powered the Perigee raise maneuver just about an hour ago. And if you look in the background, you can see the sunset of the Earth. This is the closest Orion will be to the Earth until it begins its return home. Right now, we're about 382 miles above the Earth's surface. And to put it into perspective, we are approximately 252,670 miles away from the moon. I'm going to keep reporting that number, and by the end of the translunar injection burn, you will see that start to decrease. We are going to continue to grow closer to the moon and further away from Earth. This really helps us break free from gravity. Now traveling at 17,743 miles per hour, we're about a minute and a half into the burn. And although this is the last burn for the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, there are other burns that will take place throughout the mission to direct Orion exactly where we want it to be. Those include the outbound trajectory correction burns, the first of which will happen later today. We also have the outbound powered flyby, the return powered flyby, and others. Burns after the ICPS separates will be conducted by using the single main engine on the service module, 8 auxiliary thrusters on the base of the service module, or 24 smaller thrusters. Coming up on 2.5 minutes into the translunar injection burn, and we're now traveling over 18,000 miles per hour. Again, that speed is going to increase as well. This is really going to push Orion toward the moon, and we are now 252,400 miles away from the moon. We have 10 Cubesats along for the ride with us today. Those will be deployed after this translunar injection burn and ICPS separation. These are located inside the Orion stage adapter, and they include the Lunar Ice Cube, developed by Morehead State University in Kentucky. This will search for all forms of water with an infrared spectrometer. LunaMap from Arizona State University will create higher fidelity maps of near-surface hydrogen in craters and other permanently shadowed regions of the lunar South Pole with neutron spectrometers. Omotenashi is from the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, which is also known as JAXA. They are developing the world's smallest lunar lander to study the lunar environment. And Lunar by Lockheed Martin in Colorado will perform advanced infrared imaging of the lunar surface. Now 3.5 minutes into the translunar injection burn. Again, it's about an 18-minute burn, traveling 18,560 miles per hour. Quiet on the loops here in mission control as the RL-10 engine continues doing its job on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. We talked about a few of our Cubesats. We also have one preparing to study an asteroid. The Near-Earth Asteroid Scout, or NEA Scout, by Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama will travel by solar sail to a near-Earth asteroid to take pictures of and make other characterizations of its surface. There's a Cubesat on board studying Earth called Equuleus by the University of Tokyo, along with JAXA in Japan. Equuleus stands for Equilibrium Lunar Earth Point 6U spacecraft and will travel to Lagrange Point 2, imaging Earth's plasmasphere for a better understanding of our planet's radiation environment. We're now coming up on 4 minutes and 45 seconds into the translunar injection burn. Orion traveling at 18,982 miles per hour. Our distance from the moon continues to decrease, now 251,900 miles away. To highlight some more of our Cubesats on board, we also have BioSentinel, developed by Ames Research Center in California, and will use a single yeast cell to detect, measure, and compare the impact of deep space radiation on living organisms over an extended period of time. Argo Moon was developed by the Italian Space Agency and Argotech in Italy. This Cubesat will observe the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, the stage that it's firing right now, with its advanced optics and software imaging system. And our last Cubesat through the Centennial Challenge is Team Miles from Florida, who developed a Cubesat that will demonstrate propulsion using plasma thrusters and will compete in NASA's Deep Space Derby. These Cubesats pack a ton of tech and science in a tiny package, so they don't all have redundant systems. And if any of the Cubesats missions don't go as planned, it does not affect our primary objectives of Orion's mission. This rideshare opportunity is a rare chance to send Cubesats beyond low Earth orbit, and we're looking forward to seeing what we learn. We're now 6 minutes into the translunar injection burn. Orion traveling at 19,500 miles per hour, being propelled by the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Still quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams are tracking no issues during the translunar injection burn. Again, this is about an 18-minute burn, so we have approximately 11.5 minutes left. It's also been 1 hour and 33 minutes since liftoff today from Kennedy Space Center. That was a 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time launch. A smooth ride uphill, as we heard from Bruce Tiller and Johnny Heflin working with SLS at Marshall Space Flight Center. And this view from Mission Control Houston, teams continuing to monitor the Artemis 1 mission. This is where they will be around the clock for the next 26 days, all the way until we bring Orion home for a safe splashdown. Coming up on 7.5 minutes until into the translunar injection burn, so less than 11 minutes left in the burn. Orion now traveling at almost 20,000 miles per hour, 251,237 miles away from the moon. Again, that number continuing to shrink. Orion itself is still over Earth. It is over the Pacific Ocean, south of Hawaii. As we've mentioned in today's coverage, multiple countries are represented in Artemis 1 through the SLS, Orion, and European Service Module, as well as the payloads riding along. While NASA is leading the Artemis missions, international partnerships will play a key role in achieving a sustainable presence on the Moon while preparing to send humans to Mars. In 2021, over a dozen countries signed the Artemis Accords, which will establish a common set of principles to govern the civil exploration and use of outer space. The Artemis Accords will create a safe, transparent environment that facilitates exploration, science, and commercial activities for all of humanity. This cooperation not only furthers space exploration, but also enhances peaceful relationships between countries on Earth. We're now over 9 minutes into the translunar injection burn, an 18-minute burn, so we have about 9 minutes left. We're about halfway through. The RL-10 engine continues to fire at maximum thrust. Orion traveling attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, now over 20,600 miles per hour. It's been 1 hour and 37 minutes since we launched today. Again, that was 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time from Kennedy Space Center. Orion is still attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. This is the last burn for the interim cryogenic propulsion stage while attached to Orion. It will also have a disposal burn later on. About 10 minutes after we have ICPS cut off, Orion will separate from the interim cryogenic propulsion stage itself, and the capsule will be flying free, still attached to the European Service Module. We've got about 7 minutes left in the translunar injection burn. Orion traveling now at over 21,000 miles per hour. The RL-10 engine continues to fire on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, powering the translunar injection burn. This is the second firing of the ICPS today. The first we saw was the Perigee raise maneuver, which lifted the lowest point of Orion's orbit around the Earth and put it in the proper positioning for this burn. This is the burn that commits us to the Moon. We're now over 12 minutes into this burn. Again, it's about an 18-minute burn, so less than 6 minutes left, and 1 hour 39 minutes since we launched. Orion and the ICPS now traveling at over 21,400 miles per hour. And as I promised, we continue to grow closer to the Moon, now 249,000 miles away. Now over 13 minutes into the translunar injection burn, putting us less than 5 minutes away from cutoff. We have had a nominal burn so far. That RL-10 engine continues to fire at maximum thrust, 25,000 pounds of thrust. We're now traveling over 21,730 miles per hour. And we've just heard the call for priority 1, meaning we have reached the point at which we could return at lunar return or similar speeds, testing the heat shield as required ahead of flight for Artemis 2. Now over 14 minutes into the translunar injection burn, less than 4 minutes until cutoff, traveling now at over 21,900 miles per hour. Now less than 3 minutes away from cutoff of the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, and coming up on 1 hour and 42 minutes into the Artemis 1 mission. The RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage continues to fire as planned at maximum thrust. Again, this is about an 18-minute burn. That's about twice as long as the ride to orbit today, so that just shows how much power we need to break free from the pull of Earth and take us to the moon. "16 minutes now into the translunar injection burn, Orion traveling at over 22,276 miles per hour. About a minute and a half now until cutoff of the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Again, this being an 18-minute burn. We are now 248,280 miles away from the moon and continuing to grow closer, 605 miles away from Earth, and continuing to increase that distance. Less than a minute now until cutoff of the ICPS and the end of the translunar injection burn. We've had a good burn all the way through so far. And 1 hour 44 minutes since launch today. And we have cutoff of the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which has committed Orion to the Translunar conjunction. The spacecraft is moon-bound. Orion is now traveling at 22,500 miles per hour, 247,450 miles away from Earth. Now that the interim cryogenic propulsion stage has completed its translunar injection burn, it is no longer needed to propel us to the moon. It's done its job and it will separate from Orion. After it separates, those 10 Cubesats we discussed will be deployed from the Orion stage adapter, which is below the service module and above the ICPS. Each payload will be ejected with a spring mechanism from dispensers installed on the Orion stage adapter. And again, these will help us study the moon and space weather, test innovative propulsion technologies, analyze the effects of radiation on organisms, and provide high-resolution imagery of the Earth and moon. The Cubesat deploys will start just short of about 4 hours after launch. Once those Cubesats are deployed, the ICPS will be on track for disposal in a heliocentric orbit, meaning it will closely circle the Sun until destroyed. The next change we'll see is for the ICPS to separate from Orion and the service module. Those will continue flying free on their journey toward the moon. It's now been an hour, 47 minutes, and 30 seconds into the first flight of the Artemis program. Orion now traveling 21,860 miles per hour, 1,129 miles away from Earth. That stage separation from the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, again, should be about 10 minutes after the translunar injection burn is complete, so approximately 7 minutes from now. Shortly after ICPS separation, Orion's service module will fire its auxiliary thrusters to move the spacecraft a safe distance away from the expended stage. Orion continues on an outbound path to the moon, and the Orion stage adapter attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will deliver several small payloads over several deployments. We're now over 1 hour, 51 minutes since launch today from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Orion is traveling attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, but not for much longer. We look for that separation to happen in about 5 minutes. At that point, Orion will still be flying attached to the service module, and in this animation, you can see the service module directly below the capsule. Those solar array wings are deployed. The spacecraft now traveling over 20,570 miles per hour, continuing to increase its distance from Earth, now over 1,780 miles away. Continuing to decrease its distance from the moon, 245,150 miles away. Hearing confirmation from teams here in Mission Control Houston that the solar arrays are in their proper configuration for interim cryogenic propulsion stage separation. Again, we just saw the translunar injection burn, a successful approximately 18-minute burn that has helped Orion break free from the pull of Earth's gravity and sending us toward the moon. We're now standing by for separation from that stage now that it has done its job for Orion. However, it still has a job to do. It will help eject some Cubesats that will help us study the moon, Earth, and the space environment. Orion now traveling at 19,700 miles per hour, 2,270 miles away from Earth. We're expecting that stage separation to happen in about a minute. As you can see, we have confirmation of interim cryogenic propulsion stage from Orion. With the Earth in the background and the moon is our destination, Artemis generation, we are going. It's been 1 hour, 57 minutes, and 40 seconds since Orion launched atop the SLS from Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time. After a smooth ride to orbit, a perigee raise maneuver, and a translunar injection burn conducted by the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, Orion is now flying free, attached to the European service module and on its journey to the moon. That might be the end of today's broadcast, but the Artemis 1 mission has only just begun. We'll continue live coverage for major milestones, including the outbound powered flyby and other major burns. But when we're not live, you can check out blogs.nasa.gov/Artemis and the NASA newsletter for updates on the spacecraft. We're also excited to introduce Artemis All Access. It's a short video product that will provide updates about mission accomplishments with a look at what's to come, as well as inside looks and explainers about the mission. And if you want to stay updated on mission activities and how to watch splashdown, you can still register as an online mission participant with NASA's virtual guest program to stay informed as the mission progresses. Virtual mission participants for Artemis 1 will receive curated resource and mission activities straight to their inbox. You can register at go.nasa.gov/virtualartemis1. That's a Roman numeral 1 as part of the URL. Don't forget, you can also learn about the mission on NASA and Artemis social media accounts. We'll be holding a post-launch news conference at Kennedy Space Center at 5 a.m. Eastern Time, 4 a.m. Central Time, and you can watch live at nasa.gov/live. We'll also be back on the air later today for the first orbital trajectory correction burn at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, and again at 10:45 a.m. Eastern to get a look at the first images coming down from Orion. Thank you for joining us today for our coverage of the Artemis 1 mission. We leave you now with a rendition of our national anthem performed by Josh Groban and jazz pianist Herbie Hancock, followed by a look back on today's historic liftoff as we look toward every milestone in this mission. Artemis generation, we are going.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched
Sound suppressor water now
15.
flowing under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket.
Well, in my left hand I have a feather, in my right hand a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather.
50 years after we last left footprints on the moon, NASA's Artemis 1 is our first bold step towards getting us back there and pushing us farther than we've ever been before.
Landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Of the rocket, but the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
Go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now
15.
Flowing under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttled flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter. Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange. 2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated. And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange. We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. So far, we've had a clean ascent. We saw those solid rocket boosters jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good. Our core stage main engine cutoff time is about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. We are now 5 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, 7,656 miles per hour. Again, 4 good core stage engines, those 4 RS-25 engines. The last time those core stage engines flew, they were taking space shuttles to orbit, and now with upgraded capabilities, they're launching the future of human spaceflight. Five minutes, 42 seconds into the mission, we are now traveling 8,800 miles per hour, 345 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. Again, we are anticipating core stage main engine cutoff at about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. And about 10 seconds later, we'll see core stage separation, at which point Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be flying free. Now traveling over 10,000 miles per hour, 6 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, 427 miles downrange. Quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams continue to monitor this first flight. About a minute and a half now until that core stage main engine cutoff time. Our 4 core stage engines continue to fire maximum thrust. Coming up on 7 minutes since launch today, now traveling over 12,800 miles per hour, 563 miles downrange. Again, still quiet here in Mission Control Houston. As we prepare for main engine cutoff, the 4 RS-25 engines are beginning to throttle down. "30 seconds now until core stage main engine cutoff. All 4 engines continue to throttle down. Now 7 minutes 45 seconds into the flight, traveling over 16,000 miles per hour.
50 years after we last left footprints on the moon, NASA's Artemis 1 is our first bold step towards getting us back there and pushing us farther than we've ever been before.
Landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Of the rocket, but the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
Go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Silencer pressure water now flowing
15.
under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q. flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter. Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange. 2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated. And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange. We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. So far, we've had a clean ascent. We saw those solid rocket boosters jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good. Our core stage main engine cutoff time is about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. We are now 5 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, 7,656 miles per hour. Again, 4 good core stage engines, those 4 RS-25 engines. The last time those core stage engines flew, they were taking space shuttles to orbit, and now with upgraded capabilities, they're launching the future of human spaceflight. Five minutes and 42 seconds into the mission, we are now traveling 8,800 miles per hour, 345 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. Again, we are anticipating core stage main engine cutoff at about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. And about 10 seconds later, we'll see core stage separation, at which point Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be flying free. Now traveling over 10,000 miles per hour, 6 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, 427 miles downrange. Quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams continue to monitor this first flight. About a minute and a half now until that core stage main engine cutoff time. Our 4 core stage engines continue to fire maximum thrust. Coming up on 7 minutes since launch today, now traveling over 12,800 miles per hour, 563 miles downrange. Again, still quiet here in Mission Control Houston. As we prepare for main engine cutoff, the 4 RS-25 engines are beginning to throttle down. "30 seconds now until core stage main engine cutoff. All 4 engines continue to throttle down. Now 7 minutes 45 seconds into the flight, traveling over 16,000 miles per hour.
50 years after we last left footprints on the moon, NASA's Artemis 1 is our first bold step towards getting us back there and pushing us farther than we've ever been before.
Landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Of the rocket, but the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
Go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Silencer pressure water now flowing
15.
under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q. flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter. Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange. 2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated. And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange. We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. So far, we've had a clean ascent. We saw those solid rocket boosters jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good. Our core stage main engine cutoff time is about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. We are now 5 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, 7,656 miles per hour. Again, 4 good core stage engines, those 4 RS-25 engines. The last time those core stage engines flew, they were taking space shuttles to orbit, and now with upgraded capabilities, they're launching the future of human spaceflight. Five minutes, 42 seconds into the mission, we are now traveling 8,800 miles per hour, 345 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. Again, we are anticipating core stage main engine cutoff at about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. And about 10 seconds later, we'll see core stage separation, at which point Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be flying free. Now traveling over 10,000 miles per hour, 6 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, 427 miles downrange. Quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams continue to monitor this first flight. About a minute and a half now until that core stage main engine cutoff time. Our 4 core stage engines continue to fire at maximum thrust. Coming up on 7 minutes since launch today, now traveling over 12,800 miles per hour, 563 miles downrange. Again, still quiet here in Mission Control Houston. As we prepare for main engine cutoff, the 4 RS-25 engines are beginning to throttle down. "30 seconds now until core stage main engine cutoff. All 4 engines continue to throttle down. Now 7 minutes 45 seconds into the flight, traveling over 16,000 miles per hour.
50 years after we last left footprints on the moon, NASA's Artemis 1 is our first bold step towards getting us back there and pushing us farther than we've ever been before.
Landing a man on the moon and returning him to safety to the Earth.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Of the rocket, but the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
Go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now flowing under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q. flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter. Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated, these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange. 2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated. And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange. We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. So far, we've had